On the night of September 14th, 1987, time itself seemed to hiccup in Research Triangle Park. The Research Triangle Park sprawls across 7,000 acres of carefully maintained woodland between Durham, Raleigh, and Chapel Hill. Established in 1959 as a planned research community, it houses over 200 companies and institutions, many conducting work that never appears in public records. The park's roads wind through dense stands of pine and oak, connecting glass buildings that hum quietly with servers, laboratories, and equipment that measures things most people never think about. Among these facilities are 3 separate locations that maintain atomic clocks devices so precise they can detect fluctuations in time itself, down to billionths of a second. The IBM facility on Kit Creek Road kept 2 cesium beam atomic clocks in a temperature-controlled basement vault. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences maintained a hydrogen maser clock in their Building 101 basement. 6 miles away, Burroughs Wellcome, now part of GlaxoSmithKline, operated a rubidium frequency standard in their Building 25. These clocks rarely disagreed by more than a few nanoseconds. And when they did, technicians could usually trace the variance to equipment calibration or atmospheric interference. But at exactly 11:43 p.m. and 16 seconds on September 14th, all 3 clocks recorded the same impossible event. Time jumped forward by 4.7 seconds. Not slowed down, not sped up, jumped. 4.7 seconds of time that should have existed simply vanished from the record. Dr. Margaret Chen was working late in the IBM facility that night, running calculations for a semiconductor fabrication project. She had stepped into the hallway to get coffee when she felt what she later described as a sensation of falling sideways through empty space. The fluorescent lights above her head flickered once, and she found herself standing in the same spot, holding her empty coffee cup, with no memory of walking to the break room or returning. The hallway clock read 11:44 p.m. Her wristwatch showed 11:43. Security guard James Morrison was making his rounds at the NIEHS building when his radio crackled with static and fell silent. He pressed the call button to check in with the central security desk, but heard only the dead hiss of empty frequency. Morrison later told investigators that he felt a strange heaviness in the air, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm, though the night sky remained clear. When his radio came back online 3 minutes later, the dispatcher asked why he had been silent for so long. Morrison checked his watch. He had lost nearly 7 minutes, though his route through the building should have taken him 12. At Burroughs Wellcome, night shift supervisor Patricia Valdez was reviewing production logs when every computer terminal in the facility displayed the same message. System time synchronization error. The message appeared for exactly 1 second before the screens returned to normal. But Valdez noticed that all the timestamps had jumped ahead. Digital clocks throughout the building showed different times, some fast, some slow, as if each had tried to correct itself using a different reference point. The first official report came on September 15th, when Dr. Robert Kessler, IBM's lead chronometry technician, called the National Institute of Standards and Technology to report the anomaly. NIST initially suspected equipment malfunction, but when Dr. Kessler mentioned that 2 other facilities had recorded identical readings, the agency dispatched a team to Research Triangle Park. The investigation team arrived on September 17th. They found that each facility's atomic clocks had indeed recorded the same temporal anomaly, but the backup systems told a different story. Mechanical clocks, quartz oscillators, and even computer processors operating on their own internal timing had continued running normally. Only the atomic clocks devices that measure time by counting the precise frequency of atomic transitions had detected the jump. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, the NIST team leader, interviewed witnesses and collected data for 6 days. Her preliminary report, filed on September 23rd, noted 17 people who reported unusual experiences between 11:40 and 11:50 p.m. on September 14th. The experiences varied: lost time, displaced objects, momentary disorientation, but all occurred within a 12-mile radius of the three facilities. Eleanor Vasquez, a graduate student at Duke University, had been driving south on Highway 1501 when her car radio tuned itself to a frequency that broadcasted only silence. She pulled over to adjust the dial and found herself sitting in her car at the side of the road with no memory of stopping. Her car's digital clock showed a time 4 minutes later than her watch. The radio was tuned to an empty frequency that should not have been receivable in that location. David Park, an emergency dispatcher in Durham, logged a call that came in at 11:43 p.m. from a woman who claimed she had been disconnected from a previous call, but his system showed no record of any prior contact from that number. When he asked the woman when she had called before, she insisted it had been just moments earlier. The call lasted 15 seconds before she hung up. Apparently confused, Dr. Hoffman's team spent 2 weeks testing equipment, interviewing witnesses, and consulting with physicists from Duke University and the University of North Carolina. They found no evidence of seismic activity, electromagnetic anomalies, or equipment failure. The atomic clocks had simply detected a temporal discontinuity that no other instruments had registered. The final NIST report, classified at the request of an unnamed federal agency, concluded that the incident represented an unexplained synchronization event affecting multiple high-precision timing devices. The report recommended continued monitoring, but no further investigation. Dr. Hoffman was reassigned to a project in Colorado 3 weeks later. Dr. Kessler left IBM in January of 1988 to take a position with a private research firm in California. The atomic clocks at all three facilities were quietly recalibrated and equipped with additional backup systems. Security footage from the night of September 14th was archived and later reported as damaged beyond recovery. Witnesses who had spoken to investigators found their statements sealed under scientific confidentiality agreements that lasted 10 years. But the anomaly had left traces. In the months that followed, several Research Triangle Park employees reported recurring dreams of standing in empty hallways while time moved around them like water. Dr. Chen continued to work at IBM until 1993, but colleagues noted that she frequently checked multiple timepieces and seemed uncomfortable in windowless rooms. Security guard Morrison transferred to day shifts and refused assignments that required him to work alone. The three atomic clocks continued to operate normally until their eventual replacement in the mid-90s. They never again recorded a simultaneous anomaly. However, maintenance logs show that all three clocks were recalibrated 17 times between September 1987 and December 1989, an unusually high frequency that technicians attributed to environmental sensitivity. On September 14th of each year since 1987, staff at various Research Triangle Park facilities have reported minor timing discrepancies, computer glitches, and brief moments of disorientation. These incidents are typically dismissed as coincidence or stress-related, noted in maintenance logs and forgotten, but they continue to occur year after year, always in the minutes around 11:43 p.m., always lasting just long enough for someone to notice that something isn't quite right with the flow of time itself. The empty frequencies still broadcast their silence into the North Carolina night, and the clocks tick forward, measuring moments that may or may not have happened in a place where time once forgot to behave the way time should. On 17 consecutive Tuesdays in 1994, rain fell upward in the mountains above Asheville. Craggy Pinnacle rises 5,678 feet above sea level along the Blue Ridge Parkway, 20 miles northeast of Asheville, North Carolina. The mountain forms part of the Black Mountain Range, a spine of ancient peaks that predate the Atlantic Ocean. Dense stands of Fraser fir and red spruce cling to its upper slopes, while rhododendron thickets choke the hollows between ridges. The area receives an average of 47 inches of rainfall annually, most of it falling in brief summer thunderstorms that sweep up from the valleys below. The Parkway Service maintains a weather monitoring station at Craggy Dome, installed in 1978 to track conditions along the high-elevation roadway. The station records temperature, humidity, wind speed, and precipitation using standard National Weather Service equipment. Its data feeds into regional forecasting models and helps determine when to close sections of the parkway during winter ice storm. Weather observer Thomas Chen had been stationed at Craggy Dome for 8 years when the anomalies began. He lived in a small cabin near the monitoring station and transmitted readings twice daily to the Regional Weather Office in Greer, South Carolina. Chen prided himself on accurate observations and had never filed a report that couldn't be verified by satellite imagery or neighboring stations. The first unusual rainfall occurred on Tuesday, March 8, 1994. Chen was conducting his morning equipment check when he noticed clouds forming in a tight spiral above the mountainside, roughly 2 miles southeast of his position. The clouds appeared dense and dark, characteristic of a typical spring thunderstorm, but their rotation seemed too organized for natural convection patterns. Rain began falling at 2:37 p.m. Chen watched through binoculars as the precipitation descended in a clearly defined spiral, covering an area he estimated at 2 to 3 square miles. The rain fell straight down, despite winds of 15 to 20 miles per hour that should have driven it sideways. It stopped exactly 37 minutes later, leaving the surrounding mountainside completely dry. Chen reported the incident to the Greer Weather Office, describing it as an isolated thunderstorm with unusual characteristics. His supervisor, meteorologist Janet Morrison, noted the report but found nothing particularly remarkable about localized mountain precipitation. Satellite imagery from that afternoon showed scattered clouds across the region, but no distinct weather systems. The second spiral rainfall occurred 1 week later, on Tuesday, March 15. Again, it began at 2:37 p.m. and lasted exactly 37 minutes, covering the same area with the same precise spiral pattern. Chen documented the event with photographs and detailed notes, measuring the affected area at 2.3 square miles using surveying equipment. By the fourth Tuesday, Chen had established a routine. He would position himself with camera and measuring tools at 2 p.m. each Tuesday, watching for the clouds to form. They appeared each time in the same configuration, a tight spiral approximately half a mile in diameter that expanded as it descended toward the mountain slopes. The rain that fell was unremarkable in most respects, testing as normal precipitation with typical pH levels and mineral content. But the soil beneath the spiral told a different story. Dr. Sarah Kellum, a soil scientist at Appalachian State University, first visited the site on April 19th after Chen contacted the university's geology department. Kellum collected samples from within the spiral area and from control locations outside its boundaries. Her initial analysis revealed mineral compositions that made no geological sense. The soil within the spiral contained trace amounts of osmium, iridium, and rhodium elements typically found in meteorites or deep earth magma chambers. More puzzling were isotopic ratios that didn't match any known terrestrial or extraterrestrial sources. The minerals appeared to have been deposited recently, accumulating in higher concentrations with each successive rainfall. Kellum returned the following Tuesday with a team of graduate students. They watched as the spiral formed exactly on schedule, noting that the rainfall seemed to carry more than just water. Analysis of collected precipitation revealed microscopic particles of the same unusual minerals found in the soil, as if the rain were delivering them from some unknown source high in the atmosphere. Word of the anomaly reached the National Weather Service in late April. Meteorologist Dr. Robert Hayes visited the site on May 3rd, bringing sophisticated atmospheric monitoring equipment. Hayes observed the spiral formation through instruments that measured air pressure, electrical activity, and chemical composition at various altitudes. His preliminary report described atmospheric conditions that violated several established principles of meteorology. The spiral formed in air masses that should have been too stable to support convection, Temperature and pressure readings showed no indication of the vertical air movements necessary to create and sustain the cloud formation. Most disturbing, the air inside the spiral measured several degrees warmer than surrounding areas, with no detectable heat source. Hayes submitted his findings to the National Weather Service headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland, recommending further investigation. The response came in the form of a polite letter, thanking him for his observations and informing him that the incident fell outside normal NWS parameters. Hayes was reassigned to the Wilmington, North Carolina office 6 weeks later. The University of North Carolina's Atmospheric Physics Department expressed interest in the phenomenon after Dr. Kellum shared her soil analysis results. Professor Elizabeth Ward assembled a research team that included meteorologists, geologists, and atmospheric chemists. They planned an intensive study beginning in June, with multiple observation points and continuous monitoring equipment. The team arrived at Craggy Pinnacle on June 7th, the day of what would have been the 14th spiral rainfall. They positioned instruments across the 2.3 square mile area and established a base camp near Chen's weather station. At 2:37 p.m., they waited for the spiral to form. It didn't appear. For the first time since March 8th, Tuesday passed without the spiral rainfall. The team waited through the afternoon and into evening, monitoring clear skies and stable weather conditions. They remained on site for the following Tuesday, June 14th, with the same result. The spiral rainfall never returned. Dr. Ward's team filed a brief report, noting the absence of any unusual atmospheric activity during their observation period. Their funding was redirected to a tornado research project in Kansas. Thomas Chen continued his weather observations at Craggy Dome until his retirement in 1998. He never again witnessed the spiral formation, though he maintained detailed records of all precipitation in the area. His personal notes, donated to the Appalachian State University archives, include sketches and photographs of the 17 spiral rainfalls, along with his theory that they represented some form of atmospheric memory, the sky replaying a pattern established by unknown forces. Dr. Kellum published a paper on the soil anomalies in the Journal of Environmental Geology in 1996. Her research confirmed that the unusual mineral concentrations persisted for several years after the rainfall ceased, gradually dispersing through normal weathering processes. She noted that the isotopic signatures of the deposited materials matched no known sources, terrestrial or otherwise. The soil samples collected during the spiral rainfalls remain stored in Appalachian State University's geology lab. They continue to exhibit the same unusual mineral compositions, though the concentrations have decreased over time. Graduate students occasionally analyze them for thesis projects, usually concluding that the samples represent contamination from some unidentified industrial process. On clear Tuesday afternoons in late spring, hikers along the Blue Ridge Parkway sometimes report seeing circular cloud formations above the mountains near Craggy Pinnacle. The clouds never produce rain, and satellite imagery shows no atmospheric disturbances in those areas. Weather stations record normal conditions, and the soil beneath remains unremarkable. But Thomas Chen's notebooks preserve the precise measurements of 17 impossible storms, and in a basement laboratory in Boone, North Carolina, glass vials hold particles of rain that fell from nowhere, carrying minerals that shouldn't exist, following patterns that meteorology cannot explain. In 1943, the town of Proctor, North Carolina, was supposed to disappear forever beneath the waters of Fontana Lake. Proctor sat in a narrow valley along the Little Tennessee River, in what is now the southern edge of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Founded in 1898 as a logging camp for the Ritter Lumber Company, the town grew to support nearly 800 residents by the 1920s. Two-story frame houses lined the dirt streets, along with a company store, a school, and a small church. The town existed entirely at the pleasure of the lumber company, which owned every building and employed nearly every resident. When the Tennessee Valley Authority began construction of Fontana Dam in 1942, Proctor found itself in the flood zone, The government offered residents compensation and relocation assistance, and by early 1943, the evacuation was officially complete. Army Corps of Engineers records show that all structures in the valley were demolished or removed before the dam gates closed on November 7, 1943. Fontana Lake began filling immediately, and within 6 months, the site of Proctor lay beneath 40 feet of water. Yet the town's postal zip code remained active for another 24 years. Bryson City Postmaster Harold Medford first noticed the discrepancy in 1948 while reviewing delivery routes. His records showed ongoing mail delivery to 14 addresses in Proctor, North Carolina, despite the town's official status as uninhabitable and underwater. The addresses appeared in postal routing guides and rate schedules, as if Proctor still existed as a functioning community. Medford contacted the Regional Postal Authority in Asheville to report what he assumed was a clerical error. The response he received was a form letter instructing him to continue delivering mail to all addresses listed in the official routing guide. When Medford explained that the addresses were underwater, he was told that delivery modifications required approval from the district office in Charlotte. The Proctor route assignments went to mail carrier Eugene Dalton, who had worked the mountain routes for 12 years. Dalton's instructions were to drive to the end of the old logging road that once led to Proctor and deliver mail to boxes that should have been there. The road ended at the lake shore, where rotting wooden posts marked what had once been the town's main street. Dalton later told his supervisor that he would park at the water's edge and sit in his truck for the time it would have taken to complete the Proctor deliveries, roughly 45 minutes. He would then mark the addresses as delivered and return to Bryson City. The arrangement seemed to satisfy postal requirements, and no one questioned why 14 families in a submerged town continued to receive mail. The mail itself presented another puzzle. Dalton examined the Proctor deliveries and found routine correspondence that would be expected in any small community: utility bills, bank statements, insurance notices, and personal letters. The return addresses came from businesses and individuals across North Carolina and neighboring states. All appeared to be legitimate correspondence addressed to residents who had supposedly been relocated 25 years earlier. Electric company records from the 1950s show an even stranger pattern. Nantahala Power and Light continued billing customers at 12 Proctor addresses until 1971, receiving regular payments that were processed through bank accounts, showing no signs of irregularity. The utility company's field maintenance logs document monthly meter readings and service calls to locations that should have been underwater. Supervisor Frank Morrison worked for Nantahala Power from 1952 to 1981. He told a newspaper reporter in 1993 that he had personally driven to Proctor dozens of times to service power lines and read meters. Morrison described finding electrical infrastructure that didn't appear on company maps, poles, and lines that extended into areas where the old town had stood. He would record meter readings and report equipment problems following standard procedures, never questioning why he was maintaining electrical service to a flooded valley. The phone company, Carolina Telephone and Telegraph, maintained service to 7 Proctor numbers until 1982. Service technician Robert Chen, who worked the western North Carolina territories for 30 years, remembered receiving work orders for Proctor throughout the 1970s. Chen would drive to the lakeshore and find telephone equipment that required maintenance or repair. The equipment appeared functional and properly connected to the regional network, though Chen couldn't explain how phone lines could operate underwater or why anyone would install such infrastructure at a lake bottom. Bank records from First National Bank of Silva show that 16 accounts tied to Proctor addresses remained active until the mid-1970s. These accounts received regular deposits and paid routine expenses, including utility bills, tax payments, and insurance premiums. The transactions appeared normal in every respect, except that the account holders lived in a town that had been underwater for 3 decades. Bank manager Dorothy Wilson reviewed the Proctor accounts in 1976 after noticing that several had never been converted to modern account numbers. Wilson found that the accounts maintained consistent balances and regular activity, with deposits that matched typical employment and pension payments. When she attempted to contact the account holders at their Proctor addresses, her letters were returned with postal stamps indicating that mail delivery to those addresses had been discontinued. The first official investigation came in 1967, when Postal Inspector Martin Hayes arrived in Bryson City to review rural delivery routes. Hayes had been tasked with eliminating inefficient routes and consolidating delivery areas to reduce costs. His review of the Proctor route revealed the 24-year discrepancy between official records and physical reality. Hayes interviewed mail carrier Eugene Dalton and postmaster Harold Medford, both of whom described their long-standing arrangements for handling Proctor deliveries. Hayes then contacted the Tennessee Valley Authority to confirm the status of the former town site. TVA engineers provided detailed maps showing the lake bottom topography and confirmed that the entire Proctor Valley remained underwater with no possibility of surface structures. The postal inspector's report recommended immediate discontinuation of the Proctor route and removal of all related addresses from official delivery guides. The recommendation was approved, and mail delivery to Proctor officially ended on December 31, 1967. However, utility services continued for several more years, and bank accounts remained active until their individual closure dates in the mid-70s. No investigation was conducted into why correspondence had continued flowing to Proctor for 24 years after the town's submersion. No one questioned where the mail had actually been delivered or who had been receiving utility services and maintaining bank accounts. The various agencies involved, Postal Service, Power Company, Telephone Company, and banks, simply discontinued their Proctor operations, as if they had been serving a normal community that had suddenly decided to relocate. Harold Medford retired as Bryson City Postmaster in 1973. His replacement found no records of the Proctor deliveries in the office files, though Medford had maintained detailed logs of the route for 20 years. Eugene Dalton continued working as a rural mail carrier until 1985, but never spoke publicly about his experiences delivering mail to a town that didn't exist. The Proctor incident was never formally investigated by federal authorities. No congressional hearings were held to examine how multiple government agencies and private companies had maintained services to a submerged community for decades. The various records and documents simply disappeared into bureaucratic archives, filed away as administrative anomalies rather than evidence of a systematic impossibility. Today, Fontana Lake covers the Proctor Valley with 70 feet of water at its deepest point. Boaters and fishermen navigate the lake without knowing that beneath them lie the remains of streets and foundations that somehow supported a phantom community for more than 30 years after the town officially ceased to exist. The lake is silent now, but 40 feet down, rotting posts still mark where mailboxes once stood along streets that carried the mail long after the postal truck had anywhere to go. In the waters off Cape Hatteras, 37 ship compasses pointed towards something that wasn't supposed to be there. Cape Hatteras extends into the Atlantic Ocean like a bent elbow, marking the point where the warm Gulf Stream meets the cold Labrador Current. The collision of these opposing forces creates some of the most treacherous waters on the eastern seaboard, earning the area its reputation as the graveyard of the Atlantic. More than 5,000 ships have foundered in these waters since 1,600 victims of shifting shoals, sudden storms, and magnetic anomalies that have plagued navigation for centuries. The Cape itself consists of a low-barrier island covered in maritime forest and salt marsh. Cape Point, the easternmost tip, extends into the ocean as a long spit of sand that shifts with each storm. The lighthouse, built in 1870, rises 208 feet above sea level and serves as the primary navigation aid for vessels traveling the heavily trafficked shipping lanes between Norfolk and Charleston. Local mariners have long known to expect compass variations near Cape Point. The area sits at the intersection of several magnetic declination zones, and small deviations are considered normal. Marine charts, published by the National Ocean Service, include warnings about local magnetic disturbances and recommend using multiple navigation methods when transiting the area. But the anomalies reported between 1979 and 1983 went far beyond normal magnetic variation. The first incident occurred on March 15, 1979, when the fishing vessel Mary Catherine reported compass failure approximately 2 miles southeast of Cape Point. Captain Robert Daniels, a 20-year veteran of the Outer Banks fishing grounds, radioed the Coast Guard to report that his compass was spinning freely, unable to lock onto magnetic north. The malfunction occurred suddenly, while the vessel was running a normal course in calm weather. Coast Guard Station Hatteras Inlet dispatched the patrol boat Point Lookout to assist. Petty Officer James Morrison later filed a report stating that his vessel's compass began malfunctioning when they reached the Mary Catherine's position. Both compasses settled into the same orientation, pointing steadily toward a bearing of 270 degrees due west toward the mainland. The bearing pointed to a location approximately 17 miles inland, in the middle of Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. The area consists of dense pine forest and Pocason's impenetrable wetlands that have remained largely unchanged since colonial times. No roads, structures, or geographical features exist at the coordinates indicated by the malfunctioning compasses. Morrison conducted basic troubleshooting procedures, checking electrical systems and examining the compass housing for physical damage. He found no evidence of equipment failure. When the Point Lookout moved away from the area, both vessels' compasses returned to normal operation. The incident was logged as a routine equipment malfunction, but similar reports began accumulating throughout the spring and summer of 1979. Commercial fishing boats, pleasure craft, and cargo vessels all reported identical compass behavior in the same quarter-mile area southeast of Cape Point. The affected zone appeared to have precise boundaries. Vessels reported normal compass operation until crossing an invisible line, at which point their instruments would immediately orient toward the same inland coordinates. By October 1979, Coast Guard Station Hatteras Inlet had logged 14 separate compass anomaly reports. Chief Petty Officer Patricia Williams initiated a systematic investigation, plotting the reported positions on detailed nautical charts. The affected area formed a roughly circular zone approximately half a mile in diameter, centered 2.5 miles southeast of Cape Point. Williams contacted the National Ocean Service to request updated magnetic declination data for the area. The response indicated no recent changes to magnetic field characteristics and suggested that the reports represented equipment failures rather than environmental anomalies. However, the consistency of the reported bearing always 270 degrees toward the same inland location troubled Williams enough to recommend further investigation. The investigation expanded in January 1980 when the cargo ship Atlantic Pioneer reported the same compass malfunction while transiting the area with a full load of containers bound for Norfolk. Captain Michael Chen described watching his compass needle swing wildly for several minutes before settling on the western bearing. Chen ordered a course change to avoid the anomalous area, and his compass returned to normal operation within minutes. Chen's report differed from previous incidents in one crucial detail. His ship carried sophisticated navigation equipment, including a gyro compass that should have been immune to magnetic interference. The gyro compass, which determines direction using the Earth's rotation rather than magnetic fields, also pointed toward the same inland coordinates when the vessel entered the affected zone. Coast Guard Auxiliary Pilot Sandra Davis experienced the anomaly firsthand during a routine patrol flight on March 23, 1980. Davis was conducting a search pattern 2 miles offshore when her aircraft's magnetic compass began fluctuating wildly. She switched to GPS navigation and noted that the compass malfunction occurred at the same coordinates where surface vessels had reported problems. Davis observed that the malfunction affected not only her primary compass, but also a backup handheld compass she carried for emergencies. Both instruments pointed in the same direction toward the interior of the mainland, while her aircraft's electronic navigation systems continued operating normally. The most significant incident occurred on June 12, 1981, when the Coast Guard cutter Cape Current conducted a formal investigation of the anomalous zone. The vessel carried standard magnetic compasses, a gyrocompass, and experimental magnetometer equipment borrowed from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Upon entering the affected area, all compass systems aboard the Cape Current oriented toward bearing 270 degrees. The magnetometer detected a powerful magnetic field emanating from beneath the ocean floor, with characteristics unlike any known geological formation. The field appeared to originate from a source approximately 400 feet below the seafloor, directly beneath the center of the anomalous zone. Sonar mapping conducted during the investigation revealed an underground structure of enormous size. The sonar returns indicated a metallic object roughly 600 feet in length and 200 feet in width, buried deep beneath the sandy bottom. The structure's shape and dimensions suggested artificial construction, but its location beneath 400 feet of sediment implied an age far exceeding any known human activity in the region. Chief Warrant Officer David Morrison, the Cape Current's navigation specialist, attempted to correlate the buried structure with historical records of ship sinkings in the area. No vessel matching the sonar profile appeared in wreck databases maintained by the National Park Service or the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. The structure was too large to be a colonial-era ship and too deeply buried to represent a recent sinking. The Coast Guard submitted its findings to the Naval Oceanographic Office, requesting analysis of the magnetometer data and sonar images. The response, received 3 months later, classified the information as requiring further study and transferred the investigation to an unnamed federal agency. Chief Petty Officer Williams received orders transferring her to Coast Guard Station Atlantic City 2 weeks after the report was filed. The compass anomalies continued through 1982 and into 1983, with additional reports from recreational boaters and commercial vessels. The total number of documented incidents reached 37 before the anomalies suddenly stopped in September 1983. The last reported case involved a charter fishing boat whose compass pointed toward the inland coordinates for approximately 20 minutes before returning to normal operation. No official explanation was ever provided for the compass anomalies or the buried structure detected by Coast Guard sonar. The investigation files were transferred to federal custody and classified under provisions of the National Security Act. Coast Guard personnel involved in the investigation received new assignments, and the anomalous zone was quietly removed from official navigation hazard databases. The area southeast of Cape Point continues to be heavily trafficked by commercial and recreational vessels. Modern GPS navigation has largely eliminated reliance on magnetic compasses, and no recent reports of navigation anomalies have been filed. The buried structure detected by sonar in 1981 remains undisturbed beneath 400 feet of sediment, its origin and purpose unknown. But 17 miles inland, in the depths of Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, something still calls to compasses that spin freely in the waters off Cape Hatteras, pointing toward coordinates where only pine trees grow in ancient wetlands that have never been disturbed by human hand. The forest keeps its secrets, and the compasses remember the way. On October 23, 1991, 47 people in Charlotte, North Carolina stopped existing for periods ranging from 6 to 43 minutes. Charlotte's central business district rose from cotton fields and railroad crossings to become the second largest financial center on the East Coast. By 1991, the area known as Uptown housed the headquarters of major banks, insurance companies, and corporate regional offices. Glass towers stretched 30 and 40 stories into the sky, connected by skywalks and underground tunnels that allowed workers to move between buildings without stepping onto the street. The district operated with clockwork precision. Thousands of employees rode elevators dozens of times daily, moving between floors in buildings designed for maximum efficiency. Security systems monitored every corridor, stairwell, and elevator car, recording the constant flow of people through spaces that never truly emptied, even during off hours. Building management companies maintained detailed logs of elevator operations, tracking service calls, maintenance schedules, and passenger traffic patterns. The elevators themselves represented the latest technology computer-controlled systems that could diagnose their own problems and communicate with central monitoring stations via dedicated phone lines. The first anomaly was detected at First Union Center on Trade Street at 11:37 a.m. Security guard Michael Chen was monitoring the building's central camera system when he noticed that elevator bank C, car number 3, had stopped between the 14th and 15th floors. The elevator's status indicator showed normal operation, but the car had been motionless for 8 minutes. Chen called the elevator maintenance office to report a possible malfunction. While waiting for technicians to respond, he reviewed the security footage from inside the stalled elevator. The recording showed 6 passengers standing in normal positions, facing the doors as if waiting for the car to reach their destination. They appeared calm and alert, but completely motionless, not shifting weight, checking watches, or showing any signs of impatience despite the extended delay. The elevator resumed normal operation at 11:52 a.m., arriving at the 15th floor, where all 6 passengers exited. Chen interviewed several of them in the lobby, asking if they had experienced any problems during their ride. Each person stated that the elevator had operated normally and arrived at their destination without delay. None recalled any extended stop or unusual delay. Chen filed a routine incident report and requested maintenance inspection of elevator bank C. The maintenance crew found no mechanical problems and reported normal operation of all systems. The incident was logged as a minor computer glitch and forgotten. But similar incidents were occurring simultaneously across Charlotte's business district. At Nations Bank Corporate Center on South Tryon Street, security supervisor Patricia Williams noticed identical behavior in 3 separate elevator cars between 11:30 and 12:15 p.m. Each elevator stopped between floors for periods ranging from 12 to 36 minutes, with passengers standing motionless inside the cars. When the elevators resumed operation, the passengers exited normally and reported no awareness of any delay. The Wachovia building on South College Street experienced 4 similar incidents during the same time period. Security footage showed passengers in each elevator maintaining the same calm, motionless posture while their cars remained stationary between floors. The building's computerized elevator control system registered no malfunctions or service interruptions. By the end of the day, 12 buildings in Charlotte's Central Business District had logged elevator anomalies following the same pattern. Security guards at each location independently documented incidents involving 23 separate elevator cars and 47 total passengers. The anomalies occurred between 11:30 a.m. and 12:45 p.m., with each incident lasting a different duration but following identical characteristics. Building Security Chief Robert Morrison compiled reports from all 12 locations after being contacted by colleagues who had experienced similar incidents. Morrison had worked in commercial building security for 15 years and had never encountered synchronized anomalies across multiple unconnected properties. The buildings used different elevator manufacturers, separate security systems, and independent power supplies. Morrison's preliminary investigation revealed several disturbing patterns. The affected elevators had stopped between floors at precisely the same times across all 12 buildings. Passengers in each elevator had exhibited identical behavior, standing motionless while facing the doors, with expressions that security guards consistently described as peaceful but vacant. Most troubling, the building management computers showed no record of elevator malfunctions. Status logs indicated normal operation throughout the time periods when security cameras clearly documented stationary cars. The computerized systems appeared to have continued tracking elevator movement and passenger traffic as if nothing unusual had occurred. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a neurologist at Carolinas Medical Center, reviewed security footage from 3 buildings at Morrison's request. Hoffman noted that the passengers' facial expressions and body postures suggested a state she described as alert unconsciousness, aware but not present. The passengers appeared to be looking at something beyond the elevator walls, though their eyes showed no signs of focusing on any specific point. Hoffman interviewed 8 passengers who had been recorded during the elevator incidents. Each person maintained that their elevator ride had been routine and lasted the expected duration. When shown security footage of their motionless 40-minute elevator ride, they watched with apparent confusion but expressed no memory of the extended delay. Psychological evaluation revealed no signs of amnesia, dissociation, or other memory disorders. The passengers showed normal cognitive function and accurate recall of events immediately before and after their elevator rides. They simply had no awareness that anything unusual had occurred during the time they were recorded standing motionless between floors. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department opened an investigation after Morrison filed a formal report describing the synchronized incidents. Detective James Park interviewed security personnel and reviewed footage from all 12 buildings. Park's report noted the consistency of the anomalies and the absence of any logical explanation for the synchronized elevator behavior. Park contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation after discovering that the affected buildings housed regional offices of several major financial institutions. FBI Special Agent Linda Davis arrived in Charlotte on November 2nd to review the evidence and interview witnesses. Davis's investigation focused on potential electronic interference or coordinated tampering with elevator control systems. Technical analysis of the elevator control computers revealed no evidence of external interference or system intrusion. The manufacturers, Otis, Schindler, and Dover, sent engineers to examine their respective systems and found no evidence of malfunction or tampering. Each company's equipment had operated according to design specifications throughout the time periods when anomalies were recorded. The FBI's final report, filed on December 15th, concluded that the elevator incidents represented a series of unrelated mechanical malfunctions that coincidentally occurred during the same time period. The report noted that passenger reports of normal elevator operation were consistent with temporary memory lapses caused by stress or fatigue. Agent Davis was reassigned to the FBI field office in Jacksonville, Florida, 3 weeks after filing her report. Detective Park transferred to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Traffic Division in January 1992. Building Security Chief Robert Morrison accepted a position with a private security company in Atlanta and left Charlotte in February. The security footage from October 23rd was archived in separate storage facilities maintained by each building's management company. Access to the recordings was restricted to building owners and law enforcement personnel. Morrison's compiled report was filed with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and classified as inactive, pending further evidence. No similar elevator incidents were reported in Charlotte after October 23, 1991. Building security systems continued normal operation, and elevator maintenance logs showed no unusual patterns or malfunctions. The 47 passengers who had experienced the anomalies continued working in the affected buildings, riding elevators daily without incident. But security guards who had witnessed the recordings developed subtle changes in behavior. Many began taking stairs instead of elevators when possible, and several requested transfers to different buildings. Guard stations that monitored elevator cameras were quietly moved to positions where operators could avoid watching the screens during the late morning hours. The buildings still stand in Charlotte's business district, their elevators carrying thousands of passengers daily between floors that stretch toward the sky. Security cameras continue recording, and computer systems track the movement of cars through shafts that have never forgotten the morning when time stopped between floors and 47 people went somewhere that isn't supposed to exist. In archived storage rooms across the city, videotapes preserve 43 minutes of perfect stillness, recordings of people who stood facing elevator doors that never opened, looking at something that wasn't there, waiting for a destination that might not have been in any of the buildings that rise above the Carolina Piedmont. Every 72 hours between March and November of 1985, something invisible swept through the Uwharrie National Forest, leaving silence in its wake. The Uwharrie Mountains stretch across south-central North Carolina, a worn range of ancient peaks that once rivaled the Rockies in height. Millions of years of erosion have reduced them to gentle ridges covered in mixed hardwood forests, with elevations rarely exceeding 1,000 feet. The Uwharrie National Forest encompasses 50,000 acres of this terrain, protecting one of the oldest mountain ranges on the North American continent. European settlers found the region unsuitable for large-scale agriculture, leaving vast stretches of wilderness relatively undisturbed. Gold deposits discovered in the 1800s brought miners and small settlements, but the ore played out quickly, and the forest reclaimed most human improvements. By the 1930s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps began developing the area as a national forest, much of the Uwharrie had returned to its primeval state. The forest's isolation made it ideal for scientific research and military training. Duke University operated a field research station near Badin Lake, studying forest ecology and wildlife behavior. The North Carolina National Guard used portions of the forest for training exercises, taking advantage of the rugged terrain and absence of civilian populations. Forest Service communication systems relied on a network of radio repeaters positioned on high ridges throughout the Uwharrie. The repeaters allowed rangers and researchers to maintain contact across the heavily forested terrain, where line-of-sight radio communication was often impossible. The system operated on very high-frequency channels and included emergency backup equipment powered by solar batteries. The first reports of the frequency anomaly came from Fire Tower 17 on March 12, 1985. Radio operator David Chen was conducting routine communications checks when he detected an unusual low-frequency signal that seemed to originate from the northern section of the forest. Chen described the signal as a continuous tone, barely audible, that moved slowly across the radio spectrum over several hours. Chen logged the incident as possible interference from military radio exercises at nearby Fort Bragg. However, contact with military communications personnel revealed no scheduled operations that could account for the signal. The anomaly persisted for approximately 18 hours before fading from detection. 2 weeks later, Fire Tower 23, located 15 miles south of Tower 17, reported an identical signal. Radio operator Patricia Williams documented the same low-frequency tone moving across multiple radio channels over an 18-hour period. Williams noted that the signal appeared to travel from north to south, following the general ridgeline of the Uwharrie Mountains. By May, a pattern had emerged. The signal appeared every 72 hours, beginning in the northern section of the forest and moving steadily southward at a consistent speed. Forest Service personnel calculated that the phenomenon traversed the entire 50-mile length of the forest in exactly 72 hours, maintaining an average speed of approximately 0.7 of a mile per hour. Dr. Robert Morrison, a wildlife biologist conducting research at the Duke University Field Station, first noticed the connection between the radio anomaly and animal behavior on April 23. Morrison was studying breeding patterns of migratory songbirds when he observed that forest sounds fell completely silent during the passage of the mysterious signal. Morrison's research notes describe an eerie progression of silence that moved through the forest like an advancing weather front. Birds stopped singing, insects ceased their buzzing, and even wind seemed to die away as the signal passed overhead. The silence would last approximately 6 hours at any given location before normal forest sounds gradually resumed. Camping enthusiasts and hikers began reporting strange dreams during overnight stays in the Uwharrie. The reports followed a consistent pattern: vivid, unusually clear dreams that seemed to be shared among multiple people camping in the same area. The dreams typically involved images of vast underground spaces, complex geometric patterns, and sensations of movement through dark tunnels. Sarah Valdez, a graduate student from North Carolina State University, documented her experience camping near Badine Lake on June 15th. Valdez and 3 companions reported identical dreams involving exploration of subterranean chambers filled with crystalline formations that emitted musical tones. All 4 campers recalled the same sequence of events and described the same visual details, despite sleeping in separate tents. The camping reports attracted the attention of Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, a sleep researcher at Duke University Medical Center. Hoffman organized a controlled study involving volunteer subjects who agreed to sleep in the forest during periods when the frequency anomaly was predicted to occur. Hoffman's research team used portable electroencephalography equipment to monitor brain activity during sleep cycles. The results showed unusual patterns of synchronized brain waves among subjects camping within a 5-mile radius of the moving signal. The synchronization occurred only during rapid eye movement sleep phases and corresponded precisely with the timing of the radio frequency anomaly. Most remarkably, subjects monitored during the anomaly displayed brainwave patterns that matched no known sleep stages. The electrical activity suggested a state of consciousness that combined elements of deep sleep with heightened awareness, as if the subjects were simultaneously unconscious and alert to stimuli that didn't register on conventional monitoring equipment. The Forest Service contacted the Federal Communications Commission in August to report the ongoing radio interference. FCC engineers arrived at the Uwharrie in September to conduct signal analysis using specialized monitoring equipment. The investigation team included electromagnetic spectrum analysts and technicians experienced in tracking illegal radio transmissions. The FCC equipment detected the anomalous signal but could not identify its source or transmission method. The signal appeared to originate from multiple points simultaneously, moving through the forest without any detectable transmission equipment. Spectrum analysis revealed frequencies below the normal range of human hearing, with complex harmonic patterns that suggested artificial generation. Most puzzling, the signal seemed to propagate through solid rock rather than following normal radio wave behavior. The phenomenon passed through mountains and valleys without the reflection or attenuation that would be expected from conventional electromagnetic transmissions. Recording equipment placed in underground caves detected the signal at the same strength as surface monitoring stations. The investigation expanded in October when the Department of Defense expressed interest in the Uwharrie anomaly. Military personnel arrived to conduct classified testing, bringing equipment that Forest Service personnel were not permitted to examine. The military team established a temporary base near Badine Lake and operated for 3 weeks without releasing any findings. Dr. Morrison's wildlife research was suspended in November after his funding was redirected to other projects. Hoffman's sleep study was discontinued when Duke University withdrew support, citing budget constraints. The FCC team completed their investigation and filed a report that was immediately classified under national security provisions. Forest Service radio operators continued documenting the frequency anomaly through the end of 1985, but official interest in the phenomenon waned rapidly. David Chen and Patricia Williams were both transferred to different forest locations in early 1986. The detailed logs they had maintained of the signal's behavior were collected by federal agents and never returned. The frequency anomaly stopped occurring in December 1985. Forest Service communication logs show no further reports of the traveling signal after November 27th. Wildlife behavior returned to normal patterns, and campers stopped reporting shared dreams. No official explanation was ever provided for the Uwharrie frequency phenomenon. The various government agencies that had investigated the anomaly classified their findings and reassigned personnel involved in the research. The incident was quietly removed from Forest Service records and excluded from published studies of electromagnetic phenomena in wilderness areas. The Uwharrie National Forest continues to attract researchers studying its unique ecosystem and geological features. The radio repeater network operates normally, and communication systems function without interference. Camping is popular throughout the forest, and visitors report normal recreational experiences. But deep in the archives of Duke University, sealed research files contain recordings of brainwaves that synchronized to a rhythm that moved through ancient mountains, following patterns that originated somewhere beneath rocks older than complex life on Earth. The mountains remember frequencies that swept through darkness for 9 months in 1985, carrying signals that touched sleeping minds and left them dreaming of spaces that exist only in the silence between thoughts. In the pause between one moment and the next, in the gap where consciousness goes when it travels through stone. In the tobacco fields of Nash County, North Carolina, workers began harvesting crops they had never planted. Nash County lies in the heart of North Carolina's tobacco belt, where sandy loam, soil, and humid summers create ideal conditions for growing bright-leaf tobacco. The county has produced tobacco since colonial times, with farming techniques passed down through generations of families who understood every aspect of cultivation, from seedbed preparation to barn curing. By the 1970s, Nash County Farms supplied major cigarette manufacturers and maintained some of the highest crop yields in the state. Tobacco farming follows rigid schedules dictated by weather patterns and plant biology. Seeds are started in climate-controlled greenhouses during late winter, transplanted to fields in May, and harvested leaf by leaf during the hot months of July and August. Each plant requires careful spacing, fertilization, and pest management. Experienced farmers can identify their crops from considerable distances, recognizing subtle differences in plant size, leaf shape, and field organization that distinguish one farm from another. The county's agricultural landscape consists of family farms ranging from 50 to 500 acres, with fields laid out in straight rows that follow property boundaries established by 19th century surveys. County extension agents maintain detailed records of crop plantings, soil conditions, and harvest yields for each registered farm. Property maps show clear boundaries between farms, with roads, creeks, and fence lines marking the divisions between different landowners. The first report of anomalous tobacco fields came from James Morrison, a 43-year-old farm worker who had been harvesting tobacco in Nash County for over 20 years. On July 18, 1973, Morrison was working a field owned by Robert Chen on Highway 231 near Spring Hope when he experienced what he later described as a moment of complete disorientation. Morrison had been moving systematically through rows of tobacco plants, filling his canvas apron with mature leaves, when he suddenly found himself standing in a different section of the field. The tobacco plants around him appeared larger and more robust than those he had been harvesting moments before. The rows extended in perfectly straight lines, as far as he could see, with spacing between plants that was more precise than any mechanical planter could achieve. Most disturbing, Morrison realized he had been picking leaves for an unknown period of time. His apron was nearly full of tobacco that seemed different from the variety planted on Chen's farm. The leaves were darker, with a waxy texture and an unusually strong aroma. Morrison had no memory of moving to this location or harvesting the tobacco in his apron. Chen confirmed that Morrison had been working in a different section of the field when last observed. The area where Morrison found himself was not part of Chen's planted acreage and showed no evidence of cultivation, no irrigation lines, fertilizer application, or soil preparation. Yet the tobacco plants growing there appeared healthier and more mature than Chen's carefully tended crop. Similar incidents began occurring throughout Nash County during the remainder of the 1973 harvest season. Farm workers reported finding themselves in tobacco fields that didn't match the areas where they had been working. The experiences followed a consistent pattern, a moment of disorientation, followed by the discovery that they were standing among tobacco plants they didn't remember planting or tending. Maria Santos, a seasonal worker who traveled from Florida to work Nash County tobacco farms, experienced the phenomenon on August 7, 1973. Santos was harvesting tobacco on the Henderson farm near Castalia when she suddenly found herself in rows of tobacco that appeared to have been planted in perfect geometric patterns, extending beyond the boundaries of any single farm. Santos described the tobacco plants as unusually uniform in size and appearance, with leaves that seemed to grow in mathematical arrangements. Each plant had exactly the same number of leaves, positioned at identical angles, creating an almost artificial appearance. The plants showed no signs of pest damage, disease, or weather stress that would normally affect tobacco crops during the growing season. The tobacco harvested from these mysterious fields tested differently from normal crops. Dr. Groves, Patricia Williams, an agricultural scientist at North Carolina State University, analyzed samples collected by several farm workers and found nicotine concentrations that exceeded any known tobacco variety. The chemical composition included alkaloids that didn't appear in standard tobacco plants, with molecular structures that suggested unknown genetic modifications. Williams conducted field surveys to locate the source of the anomalous tobacco, but found no evidence of the geometric plantings described by farm workers. Property maps and aerial photographs showed only conventional tobacco fields with standard row spacing and irregular boundaries, typical of family farming. The perfect geometric patterns reported by workers appeared to exist only during the brief moments when workers found themselves displaced. County Extension Agent David Park began documenting the reports after receiving calls from multiple farm owners whose workers had described similar experiences. Park interviewed 47 farm workers during the 1974 harvest season and found remarkable consistency in their accounts. Workers consistently described tobacco fields with geometric precision, plants with unusual uniformity, and the disorienting experience of finding themselves in locations they couldn't identify. Park's investigation revealed that the phenomenon occurred only during active harvest work. Workers who were planting, cultivating, or performing other farm tasks never reported the displacement experiences. The anomaly seemed connected specifically to the act of harvesting tobacco leaves from mature plants. The reports attracted attention from researchers at Duke University's psychology department, who suspected the incidents might represent a form of group hysteria or shared hallucination caused by nicotine exposure. Dr. Sarah Kellum organized a study involving workers who agreed to wear monitoring equipment during harvest operations. Kellum's team used GPS tracking devices and video cameras to monitor worker locations and activities during the 1975 harvest season. The equipment recorded several incidents where workers appeared to vanish from their assigned locations for periods ranging from 15 minutes to over an hour. During these absences, GPS signals were lost, and video recordings showed empty fields where workers had been working moments before. When workers reappeared, they consistently reported harvesting tobacco from the geometrically perfect fields. Analysis of the tobacco they carried showed the same unusual alkaloid concentrations found in earlier samples. However, the GPS and video equipment showed no record of the workers visiting any location other than their originally assigned field. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture initiated an investigation in 1976 after receiving reports that Nash County Tobacco was testing outside normal parameters for nicotine content. State inspectors examined farms throughout the county, but found only conventional tobacco varieties planted using standard agricultural practices. Soil samples collected from areas where workers reported geometric tobacco fields showed no evidence of recent planting or cultivation. Chemical analysis revealed standard soil composition, with no unusual fertilizers or additives that could account for the reported plant characteristics. The inspector's report concluded that the anomalous tobacco must have originated from an unidentified source outside Nash County. The investigation was quietly discontinued after tobacco industry representatives expressed concerns about negative publicity affecting North Carolina's reputation as a tobacco producer. State agricultural officials were instructed to classify the matter as resolved and redirect inspection resources to other counties. Dr. Kellum's research was terminated when Duke University declined to renew her grant funding. Park was transferred to a position with the State Agriculture Department in Raleigh, and Williams's tobacco analysis project was reassigned to other researchers. The farm workers who had reported the experiences found employment in other counties or left agricultural work entirely. Nash County continues to produce tobacco using conventional farming methods. Modern mechanized harvesting has largely replaced hand labor, and GPS technology allows precise tracking of farm equipment. Agricultural extension services maintain detailed records of crop plantings and soil conditions throughout the county. But in storage facilities maintained by North Carolina State University, samples of tobacco with impossible alkaloid concentrations remain preserved in laboratory freezers. The samples are labeled with collection dates from the 1970s and location coordinates that correspond to empty fields where no tobacco was ever planted, according to official records. The geometric tobacco fields exist now only in the memories of farm workers who found themselves harvesting crops that grew in mathematical perfection, following patterns that agricultural science cannot explain. The plants themselves have vanished, leaving behind only the lingering question of how 47 people could harvest tobacco from fields that were never there, picking leaves that contain chemistry that shouldn't exist in any plant that grows in Carolina soil. In the summer heat of Nash County, tobacco fields still stretch toward the horizon in neat rows that follow property lines and farming tradition. But somewhere between the planted rows and the harvested leaves, something remembers the geometry of a crop that existed only when hands reached out to pick it, only when workers stepped sideways into fields that occupied the same space as reality, but followed different rules about what can grow and what can be gathered from plants that were never seeds. On Grandfather Mountain's swinging bridge, visitors began hearing conversations that hadn't happened yet. Grandfather Mountain rises 5,964 feet above sea level in western North Carolina, dominating the landscape between Boone and Linville. The mountain forms part of the Blue Ridge chain, with distinctive rocky outcrops and deep valleys that create dramatic elevation changes across relatively short distances. Cherokee tradition holds that the mountain's profile resembles the face of an ancient grandfather looking skyward, giving the peak its English name. The mile-high swinging bridge, completed in 1952, spans an 80-foot chasm near the mountain's summit. The bridge connects two rocky outcrops at an elevation of 5,305 feet, making it one of the highest suspension footbridges in the United States. On clear days, visitors can see views extending over 100 miles in all directions, encompassing portions of 4 states. The bridge itself measures 228 feet in length and sways gently in mountain winds that regularly exceed 30 miles per hour. Safety cables and handrails allow visitors to cross safely, though many experience vertigo when looking down into the valley below. The structure was engineered to withstand extreme weather conditions, including ice storms and high winds common at that elevation. Acoustic properties around the bridge create natural echoes when visitors call out across the valley. Sound waves bounce off distant ridges and return as faint repetitions of the original calls. Park naturalists often demonstrate this phenomenon for tourists, explaining how sound travels across the mountain terrain and returns at predictable intervals. But the voices documented since 1962 don't behave like normal echoes. The first recorded incident occurred on September 14, 1962, when visitors Robert and Margaret Chen were crossing the bridge during their honeymoon trip. Robert called out, "Hello!" across the valley and heard his own voice respond, "Can you hear me now?" several seconds later. Neither Robert nor Margaret had spoken those words, though Robert later found himself saying them to Margaret when they reached the far side of the bridge. Park Ranger Patricia Williams documented the Ken's report in the daily log, noting it as an unusual echo phenomenon. Williams had worked at Grandfather Mountain for 8 years and was familiar with the normal acoustic behavior around the bridge. The incident struck her as noteworthy because the returned phrase was different from the original call and included words that hadn't been spoken at the time of the echo. Throughout the autumn of 1962, Williams collected additional reports from visitors who experienced similar vocal anomalies while crossing the bridge. The incidents followed a consistent pattern. Visitors would speak or call out, then hear their own voices returning from across the valley with different words. Words they would find themselves speaking later during their visit. Dr. Sarah Morrison, a physics professor at Appalachian State University, visited the bridge in October 1962 after learning about the reports from a colleague. Morrison brought recording equipment to document the acoustic properties and attempt to measure any unusual sound behavior. Her initial recordings captured normal echo patterns during most atmospheric conditions. However, on October 23rd, Morrison's equipment recorded the anomalous vocal phenomenon. She had called out, "Testing, 1, 2, 3, and received an echo of her own voice saying, "The weather is changing rapidly." Morrison noted that she spoke those exact words to her research assistant 15 minutes later when cloud cover began moving across the mountain. Morrison's analysis of the recordings revealed audio characteristics that violated basic principles of acoustics. The returned voices carried tonal qualities and speech patterns identical to the original speakers, but the words were different, and the timing suggested the sound had traveled much farther than the valley acoustics would allow. Most puzzling, spectral analysis showed that the echoed voices contained information that wasn't present in the original calls. Word of the anomaly spread through academic circles, attracting researchers from Duke University and the University of North Carolina. Dr. Michael Park, an audio engineer, conducted extensive recordings during the summer of 1963, documenting over 30 incidents where visitors heard their own voices, speaking words they hadn't yet said. Park's most detailed case involved a family from Ohio visiting on July 11, 1963. 8-year-old Jennifer Davis called out, "Mommy, look at the view," and heard her own voice respond, "I want to go home now." The child burst into tears upon hearing the echo, and her family decided to cut short their visit. As they walked toward the parking area 20 minutes later, Jennifer spoke the exact words that had echoed back to her, "I want to go home now." The phenomenon attracted visitors who came specifically hoping to experience the anomalous echoes. Park rangers began noting that the incidents occurred only under specific atmospheric conditions that seemed impossible to predict. Temperature, humidity, and wind patterns showed no consistent relationship to when the vocal anomalies occurred. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, a meteorologist from the National Weather Service, studied weather conditions during documented incidents throughout 1964 and 1965. Hoffman found no atmospheric patterns that could explain why normal echoes occasionally became temporal voice displacements. The anomalies occurred during clear weather, storms, temperature inversions, and stable atmospheric conditions with equal frequency. Most disturbing to researchers was the accuracy of the displaced voices. In every documented case, visitors eventually spoke the exact words they had heard echoed back to them. The time delay between hearing the echo and speaking the original words ranged from minutes to several hours, but the match was always precise, including inflection and emotional tone. The National Park Service became concerned about the publicity surrounding the vocal anomalies when visitor numbers increased dramatically during the summer of 1965. Park Superintendent David Wilson requested that researchers discontinue their investigations and avoid publicizing the phenomenon. Wilson cited safety concerns about increased bridge traffic and the potential for accidents caused by visitors spending excessive time trying to trigger the anomalies. Academic interest in the Grandfather Mountain echoes waned. After the Park Service restricted research access, Dr. Morrison's funding was redirected to other projects, and Dr. Park moved to a position at a university in California. The various recording equipment was removed, and no further systematic study of the phenomenon was conducted. Park rangers continued documenting incidents in daily logs through the 1970s and 80s, but the reports were filed without analysis or follow-up investigation. The frequency of documented cases declined. as rangers were instructed to discourage visitors from attempting to trigger the anomalous echoes. However, the incidents never stopped occurring. Park records show over 200 documented cases of displaced voices between 1962 and 1995. When computerized logging systems replaced handwritten reports, the electronic records contain fewer details about individual incidents, but continue to note occasional acoustic anomalies around the mile-high swinging bridge. Modern visitors to Grandfather Mountain occasionally report hearing their own voices speaking words they haven't said, but the incidents are typically dismissed as normal echoes or misheard sounds. The park's interpretive materials mention the area's interesting acoustic properties, but make no reference to the temporal voice displacement phenomenon. The mile-high swinging bridge continues to attract thousands of visitors annually who enjoy the spectacular mountain views and experience normal echo effects when calling across the valley. The bridge sways gently in mountain winds, and sounds carry across the ridges in predictable patterns that follow the laws of physics. But archived in storage boxes at Appalachian State University, cassette recordings preserve the voices of visitors who spoke conversations that hadn't happened yet, calling out words that would only exist in the future, echoing back from a place where time moves differently across the valleys of western North Carolina. The mountain keeps its schedules, and the bridge spans more than just the distance between two rocky outcrops. It connects moments that haven't occurred, with voices that remember what hasn't been said, carrying words across space and time in the thin air above valleys that echo with conversations still waiting to happen. In a stretch of the Roanoke River that should flow south toward the sea, water has been moving north for longer than anyone can remember. The Roanoke River originates in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia and flows southeast for 410 miles through North Carolina before emptying into Albemarle Sound. Near the town of Roanoke Rapids in Halifax County, the river drops 150 feet in elevation over a series of rocky rapids that once powered textile mills and tobacco processing plants. The falls have attracted industry since colonial times, when settlers harnessed the river's energy to operate grist mills and sawmills. The modern city of Roanoke Rapids grew around these waterfalls, taking its name from the natural feature that defined its economy. By the mid-20th century, the rapids were partially modified by dam construction and industrial development, but significant portions remained in their natural state. The river maintains a strong southward current through this section, carrying runoff from Virginia's mountains toward the Atlantic Ocean. Topographical surveys conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers show a consistent downward gradient of approximately 8 feet per mile through the Roanoke Rapids area. Geological studies indicate that the riverbed consists of granite bedrock with no underground springs or aquifers that could influence surface water flow. The hydrology appears straightforward. Water flows downhill from higher to lower elevations, following the path of least resistance toward the sea. Local fishing guides, however, have long known about a section of river where normal rules don't apply. Dr. Margaret Williams first encountered the anomalous current on June 14, 1978, while conducting a study of fish migration patterns for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. Williams was tracking tagged striped bass, moving upstream from Albemarle Sound, when her research boat encountered water flowing in the wrong direction, approximately 3 miles north of Roanoke Rapids. Williams initially assumed her boat's instruments were malfunctioning. The GPS showed her position accurately, and the boat's compass pointed correctly. But the current was clearly carrying floating debris upstream against the expected flow direction. Williams deployed dye markers to confirm the water movement and observed them traveling steadily northward for over an hour. The affected area extended for exactly 1.7 miles along a straight section of river, bordered by dense hardwood forest. At the upstream end, the water gradually returned to normal southward flow, while at the downstream end, the current met the incoming flow in a standing wave pattern that created constant turbulence. Williams contacted Dr. Robert Chen, a hydrologist at North Carolina State University, to verify her observations. Chen arrived on June 20th with additional monitoring equipment and found the same impossible current behavior. Water flow measurements showed velocities of 2 to 3 feet per second in the upstream direction, comparable to normal current speeds in the southward flowing sections. Chen's initial theory focused on possible underground springs or tributary inputs that could create localized current reversals. However, detailed surveys found no significant water sources entering the river within the affected area. Chemical analysis of the water showed composition identical to the surrounding river sections, with no indication of groundwater influence or unusual mineral content. The reversed current operated continuously, showing no variation with seasonal water levels, rainfall, or tidal influences from Albemarle Sound 70 miles downstream. Flow measurements remained consistent regardless of weather conditions or time of year, suggesting a phenomenon independent of normal hydrological cycles. Local fishing guide Thomas Morrison had been navigating the reversed current for over 30 years without understanding why it occurred. Morrison's father and grandfather had also worked these waters, referring to the area as the backwards stretch and using it as a landmark for locating productive fishing spots. Morrison explained that experienced local fishermen had always known about the peculiar water flow, but considered it simply another characteristic of the river, like the rapids themselves. Fishermen would often drift with the upstream current to reach areas that would otherwise require paddling against normal flow. The phenomenon was so familiar to locals that they rarely mentioned it to outsiders. Dr. Patricia Davis, a geologist from East Carolina University, joined the investigation in August 1978 to examine potential underground causes for the current reversal. Davis conducted seismic surveys and core drilling to map subsurface rock formations beneath the river. Her analysis revealed normal granite bedrock with no caverns, underground channels, or geological features that could redirect water flow. Most puzzling, Davis found that the riverbed elevation continued to drop consistently through the area of reversed current. Water was flowing uphill along a measurable gradient, violating fundamental principles of fluid dynamics. The phenomenon appeared to involve only the surface water, with deeper currents following normal downstream patterns. Temperature measurements revealed another anomaly. The upstream flowing water maintained a constant temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of seasonal air temperatures or normal river temperatures. In winter, when the surrounding river approached 40 degrees, the reversed section remained at 68 degrees. In summer, when normal river temperatures reached 80 degrees, the anomalous area stayed at the same constant temperature. Fish behavior in the reversed current section attracted attention from wildlife biologists. Dr. Sarah Park documented unusual migration patterns among anadromous species that normally swim upstream to spawn. Fish entering the backwards current would often circle repeatedly before either returning downstream or continuing past the anomalous area. Park's underwater video recordings showed fish swimming downstream relative to the riverbed, while actually moving upstream with the current. The footage created a disorienting effect, with fish appearing to swim backward while maintaining normal forward orientation relative to the water movement. The North Carolina Division of Water Resources opened a formal investigation in September 1978 after Dr. Williams submitted her initial report. State hydrologists conducted comprehensive flow measurements and found the upstream current operating exactly as described, with no apparent cause or mechanism. The investigation team contacted the U.S. Geological Survey for additional expertise and equipment. USGS scientists arrived in October with sophisticated current measurement devices and found the same impossible flow patterns. Their report noted that the phenomenon violated established principles of surface water hydrology, but offered no explanation for its existence. Federal interest in the anomaly increased when the Army Corps of Engineers became involved due to navigation concerns on the Roanoke River. Corps engineers worried that the unusual current could affect boat traffic or indicate structural problems with upstream dams. However, inspection of all river control structures found no mechanical issues or design flaws that could account for the reversed flow. The investigation expanded to include consultation with fluid dynamics experts from major universities. Theoretical physicists proposed various explanations involving magnetic fields, gravitational anomalies, or unknown underground water sources, but none could be verified through field testing. As the investigation continued into 1979, government agencies began classifying their findings. The Army Corps of Engineers report was marked confidential and excluded from public navigation documents. USGS data was transferred to federal archives with restricted access. State wildlife officials were instructed to avoid discussing the anomaly in public statements. Dr. Williams found her research funding discontinued in early 1979 when the Wildlife Resources Commission redirected her project to other rivers. Dr. Rivers Chen received a transfer to a university position in Colorado. The various scientists involved in the investigation moved to different assignments or retired from government service. Local fishing guides continued using the reversed current for navigation, but they were discouraged from discussing it with outsiders. Tourism officials for Halifax County received instructions to avoid mentioning the anomaly in promotional materials, focusing instead on normal recreational fishing opportunities. The Roanoke River flows south toward the sea as it has for thousands of years, carrying mountain runoff through the rapids that gave the city its name. Navigation charts show normal current directions and flow rates throughout the area. Hydrological studies indicate standard river behavior consistent with topographical gradients. But in a section of river that appears on no official maps as unusual, water continues moving upstream against gravity, carrying leaves and debris northward, while fish swim in circles around a phenomenon that hydrology cannot explain. The backwards current maintains its impossible flow, constant temperature, and precise boundaries, operating according to rules that exist only in that 1.7 miles of river that remembers a different direction for water. Local fishermen still drift with the upstream current, following paths their grandfathers knew, navigating by landmarks that include the place where water forgot which way it was supposed to flow toward the ocean that waits downstream in a direction the river has learned to ignore. On October 7, 1984, the airwaves around Winston-Salem's Renolda estate fell silent in a way that electronics couldn't explain. Renolda Estate occupies 1,067 acres in northwest Winston-Salem. Originally built as the country home of tobacco magnate R.J. Reynolds and his wife Catherine, completed in 1917, the estate included a 60-room mansion, formal gardens, working farm, and village designed to be a self-sufficient community. After Reynolds' death in 1918, the estate became a center for arts and education, eventually housing Wake Forest University until 1956. By 1984, the Renolda House served as a museum of American art, while the surrounding grounds hosted Renolda Gardens and Wake Forest University's graduate programs. The area maintained its character as an affluent residential neighborhood, with tree-lined streets and large homes occupied by faculty, medical professionals, and business executives who valued the proximity to downtown Winston-Salem and the cultural institutions. The neighborhood's communication infrastructure reflected its upscale character. Residents had access to multiple radio stations, 3 television networks, and recently installed cable television systems. The area's elevation and lack of interference made it ideal for clear reception of broadcast signals from regional stations in Greensboro, Charlotte, and Raleigh. Radio propagation studies conducted in the early 1980s showed no unusual characteristics in the Renolda area's electromagnetic environment. The Federal Communications Commission had recorded no significant interference sources, and broadcast engineers considered the location optimal for consistent signal reception. The first sign of anomalous behavior occurred on the morning of October 7th. when Reynolda House Museum director Dr. Patricia Williams arrived at work to find the building's radio system producing only static. Williams initially assumed the problem was equipment failure, but testing revealed that all broadcast frequencies were silent, not producing static or interference, but completely absent of any signal. Dr. Robert Chen, a medical professor living on Reynolda Road, experienced the same phenomenon at his home that morning. Chen had been listening to his usual news program during breakfast when all stations suddenly went silent. Checking multiple radios throughout his house revealed the same absence of signals. Television channels displayed only snow, and cable systems showed no programming despite normal power and equipment operation. The communications blackout extended in a precise circle approximately 2 miles in radius, centered on the Reynolda House Museum. Residents could drive a few miles in any direction and immediately receive normal radio and television signals, but returning to the affected area resulted in complete silence across all broadcast frequencies. Most disturbing, the phenomenon affected only broadcast signals, while leaving other electronic systems completely functional. Telephones worked normally, as did computers, electronic appliances, and even radio equipment used for purposes other than receiving broadcast signals. Ham radio operators could transmit and receive on their normal frequencies, but commercial AM and FM radio stations remained undetectable. Museum security guard Michael Morrison discovered the boundary of the silent zone during his rounds on October 8th. Morrison had brought a portable radio to monitor weather conditions and found that signals would fade to nothing as he approached the museum grounds, then returned to normal strength when he walked back toward Reynolda Road. The transition occurred within a few yards, creating a sharp boundary between normal reception and complete silence. Wake Forest University physics professor Dr. Sarah Kellum learned of the phenomenon from colleagues living in the affected area and began informal measurements using department equipment. Kellum's initial tests confirmed that radio frequency energy in normal broadcast bands was simply absent within the silent zone. Spectrum analyzers showed empty frequency ranges where powerful regional stations should have been easily detectable. The phone calls began on October 10th, 3 days after the radio silence started. Residents throughout the affected area reported receiving calls that consisted entirely of classical music performances. The calls came from numbers that didn't exist in local telephone directories and couldn't be traced through normal telephone company records. Eleanor Vasquez, a retired music teacher living on Country Club Road, received the first documented musical call at approximately 8:30 p.m. The caller ID displayed a number with the correct local area code, but an exchange that had never been assigned to Winston-Salem. When Vasquez answered, she heard what she described as a piano sonata, performed with exceptional skill and clarity. The music lasted approximately 15 minutes before the line went dead. Vasquez later told investigators that the piece sounded familiar, but didn't match any classical composition she could identify, despite 40 years of teaching music and an extensive personal knowledge of piano literature. Similar calls were reported throughout the silent zone over the following nights. The music varied from solo piano to full orchestral performances, but all shared the same characteristics: exceptional recording quality, familiar but unidentifiable compositions, and origin from non-existent telephone numbers. Dr. David Park, a musicologist at Wake Forest University, interviewed residents who had received the mysterious calls and attempted to identify the musical pieces. Park had access to extensive classical music databases and could usually identify obscure compositions from brief descriptions. However, none of the pieces described by call recipients matched any known works in standard classical repertoire. Park arranged to be present during several calls, listening to the music and recording what he could. His analysis revealed compositions that followed classical forms and conventions, but included harmonic progressions and melodic development that didn't match any known composer's style. The pieces sounded as if they had been written by masters of the classical period, but contained musical elements that those composers had never used. Most puzzling was the universal reaction among listeners that the music sounded familiar. Regardless of their musical background or knowledge, Everyone who heard the mysterious calls reported a sense of recognition, as if they were hearing pieces they had known since childhood but somehow forgot. The Winston-Salem Police Department opened an investigation on October 15th after receiving multiple complaints about the unexplained calls. Detective James Morrison interviewed residents and attempted to trace the phone numbers, but telephone company records showed no evidence that the calls had ever occurred. Billing systems, switching equipment logs, and central office records contained no trace of calls to the affected numbers during the reported times. The Federal Communications Commission became involved after local broadcasting stations complained about interference affecting their coverage area. FCC engineers arrived on October 18th with sophisticated monitoring equipment to measure electromagnetic conditions in the silent zone. The investigation team found electromagnetic characteristics that violated established principles of radio propagation. The affected area showed normal background radiation levels and no indication of jamming or interference, yet broadcast signals simply ceased to exist within the defined boundaries. The phenomenon appeared to involve selective absorption of specific frequency ranges, while leaving others completely unaffected. Most troubling to FCC engineers was the precision of the affected area. Radio signals faded to zero within yards of crossing the boundary, then returned to full strength immediately outside the zone. The boundary remained constant, regardless of atmospheric conditions, time of day, or seasonal changes that normally affect radio propagation. The investigation expanded when the National Security Agency expressed interest in the communications anomaly. NSA technicians arrived in Winston-Salem on October 23rd, but operated under security classifications that prevented coordination with local authorities or academic researchers. Their activities within the silent zone were conducted without public disclosure. Dr. Kellum's research was suspended when Wake Forest University administration requested that faculty avoid publicizing the phenomenon. The FCC investigation was classified and transferred to federal jurisdiction. Local police were instructed to refer all inquiries about the radio silence to federal authorities. The mysterious phone calls stopped abruptly on October 26th, and radio signals returned to normal throughout the affected area on October 28th. The transition occurred as suddenly as the original silence, with residents reporting that their radios began receiving stations in the middle of regular programming. No official explanation was provided for the 3-week communications blackout. FCC files related to the investigation were classified, and NSA involvement was never publicly acknowledged. The telephone calls were dismissed as pranks, despite the lack of any evidence in phone company records. Residents of the Ranolda area resumed normal use of radio and television systems. The mysterious phone numbers never appeared again in caller ID systems, and no similar musical calls were reported. The incident was quietly forgotten as news coverage moved to other topics. Dr. Kellum left Wake Forest University in December 1984 to accept a position at a research institute in California. Detective Morrison transferred to a different division within the Winston-Salem Police Department. The various federal investigators returned to their respective agencies and were assigned to different projects. The Ranolda House Museum continues to operate as a center for American art, welcoming visitors who tour the mansion and gardens without knowledge of the communications blackout that once surrounded the estate. Radio and television signals reach the area clearly, and telecommunications systems function normally. But in basement storage rooms at Wake Forest University, recordings preserve fragments of classical music that never existed, performed by orchestras that never assembled, composed by masters who never wrote those particular notes, in combinations that sound like childhood memories of songs that were never sung. The airwaves carry their normal burden of voices and music and news, broadcasting into homes where residents occasionally pause while turning radio dials, listening for something they can't quite remember, searching for melodies that once called to them from numbers that don't exist, playing music that felt like coming home to a place they had never been. Every leap year since 1976, The weather station at Appalachian State University has recorded a day that shouldn't exist in the mountains of North Carolina. Boone sits at an elevation of 3,333 feet in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where winter temperatures routinely drop below freezing, and snow can fall from November through March. The town serves as the county seat of Watauga County and home to Appalachian State University, whose campus occupies several hillsides overlooking the South Fork New River Valley. The National Weather Service established a cooperative weather station on the university campus in 1958 to monitor conditions in the high country of western North Carolina. The station's instruments record temperature, precipitation, humidity, and barometric pressure 4 times daily, providing data that feeds into regional forecasting models and climate research databases. The Boone Station operates according to strict National Weather Service protocols, with equipment calibrated annually and observations conducted by trained university personnel. The station's location provides representative measurements for the broader region, helping meteorologists understand weather patterns across the Appalachian Highlands. Winter weather in Boone follows predictable patterns established over decades of observation. February typically brings the coldest temperatures of the year, with daily highs averaging in the low 40s and overnight lows often dropping into the teens. Snow and ice are common, and the mountain environment remains dormant until spring warming begins in March. But every 4th February, on the 29th day that appears only in leap years, the Boone Weather Station records temperatures that climb into the 80s, while frost forms on every surface in town. The first documented anomaly occurred on February 29, 1976, when weather observer Dr. Margaret Chen arrived for her morning readings to find the thermometer registering 78 degrees at 8 a.m. Chen initially suspected equipment malfunction, as overnight temperatures had been measured at 26 degrees just 6 hours earlier. Chen checked the instrument housing and found no evidence of heating or external interference. The thermometer showed a steady climb from sub-freezing temperatures beginning at approximately 2 a.m., rising at a rate of roughly 7 degrees per hour. By noon, the temperature had reached 86 degrees, a reading that would be remarkable even in summer at that elevation. Most puzzling, the warm temperatures were accompanied by widespread frost formation throughout the Boone area. Car windshields, building windows, and exposed metal surfaces displayed heavy ice crystals despite the recorded heat. University maintenance staff reported that heating systems in campus buildings were struggling to maintain comfortable indoor temperatures, as if the warm outdoor air wasn't providing the expected thermal relief. Dr. Robert Morrison, a botany professor at the university, observed the day's weather from his office overlooking the campus. Morrison noted that deciduous trees remained leafless and dormant, despite the recorded temperatures that should have triggered immediate budding and leaf emergence. Grass stayed brown and frost-covered, even as the thermometer showed conditions suitable for rapid spring growth. The anomalous weather lasted exactly 12 hours, with temperatures returning to normal February levels by 2 p.m. The frost disappeared as suddenly as it had formed, leaving no trace of the morning's impossible combination of heat and ice. Chen filed her report with the National Weather Service, noting the unusual readings but offering no explanation for the phenomenon. Her supervisor responded that the data appeared to represent instrument error and should be corrected to show typical February temperatures. Chen protested that multiple instruments had recorded identical readings, but the official weather record was amended to remove the anomalous data. 4 years later, on February 29, 1980, the phenomenon repeated exactly. Weather observer Patricia Williams documented the same 12-hour temperature spike, reaching 84 degrees, while frost covered every horizontal surface in town. Williams had been briefed about the 1976 incident and was prepared with additional monitoring equipment. Williams' expanded measurements revealed that the warm air carried scents of blooming flowers, specifically dogwood, redbud, and wild azalea, that wouldn't naturally bloom until late April or May. The fragrances were strong enough to be detected throughout the campus, creating a sensory experience of spring despite the visual evidence of winter conditions. Wildlife behavior during the anomalous day suggested that animals were responding to the warm temperatures rather than the visual cues of winter. Birds sang with the enthusiasm typically heard during spring mating season. Squirrels became unusually active, behaving as if searching for food sources that would normally be available months later. Insects that should have been dormant appeared briefly, only to disappear again when temperatures returned to normal. Dr. Sarah Kellum, a meteorologist from the University of North Carolina, traveled to Boone for the February 29, 1984 event. After learning about the recurring anomaly, Kellum brought sophisticated atmospheric monitoring equipment and stationed herself at the weather station to observe the phenomenon firsthand. Kellum's measurements confirmed the temperature readings and documented additional atmospheric anomalies. Barometric pressure remained stable throughout the temperature spike, showing none of the variations typically associated with rapid warming. Humidity levels stayed consistent with winter conditions despite the heat. Wind patterns showed no indication of warm air masses moving into the area from lower elevations. Most remarkably, Kellum found that the warm temperatures existed only in a narrow layer between ground level and approximately 6 feet in height. Temperature readings taken from the rooftops of campus buildings showed normal February conditions, as did measurements from aircraft flying over the area. The anomalous warmth formed a thin horizontal zone that affected only the immediate surface environment. The recurring nature of the phenomenon attracted attention from the National Weather Service headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. Regional climatologist Dr. Spring Prives. David Park visited Boone in February 1988 to conduct an official investigation. Park brought calibrated equipment and additional personnel to monitor the entire Leap Day event. Park's team documented the same impossible weather conditions but found no meteorological explanation for their occurrence. The warm air showed no chemical composition differences from normal atmosphere. Satellite imagery revealed no unusual cloud formations or atmospheric disturbances over the Boone area. Upper-level weather patterns remained typical for late February in the Appalachian region. Park's preliminary report described the phenomenon as a localized atmospheric anomaly of unknown origin. He recommended continued monitoring and possible cooperation with university researchers to study the recurring event. However, the final report filed with the National Weather Service concluded that the measurements represented systematic instrument error and recommended equipment replacement. Dr. Chen was reassigned to a weather station in eastern North Carolina following the submission of Park's report. Patricia Williams accepted early retirement after 22 years of weather observation service. The weather station equipment was completely replaced in 1989, with new instruments installed by National Weather Service technicians. The new equipment recorded the same anomalous readings on February 29, 1992. Automated systems documented the 12-hour temperature spike, while frost sensors simultaneously detected ice formation throughout the monitoring period. Digital records showed the contradictory measurements with precision that eliminated any possibility of human observation error. University officials contacted the National Weather Service to report the continued anomalies, but were informed that the data represented equipment malfunction requiring manufacturer intervention. Federal technicians arrived to inspect and recalibrate all instruments, finding no mechanical problems or electronic faults. The investigation was quietly discontinued when university administration received a request from federal authorities to avoid publicizing the weather anomalies. Academic staff were discouraged from discussing the measurements with media or outside researchers. The weather station continued normal operations, with instructions to report equipment problems rather than unusual readings. February 29th continues to bring the same impossible weather to Boone every 4 years. Automated equipment records the temperature spikes with digital precision, while frost forms on surfaces throughout the campus. The scent of spring flowers drifts through winter air, and birds sing mating songs, while ice crystals grow on their perches. Students attending classes on Leap Day occasionally notice the unusual warmth and mention it to professors who quietly acknowledge the phenomenon. but offer no explanations. Weather data from those days is automatically flagged in computer systems and excluded from climate research databases. The National Weather Service maintains the Boone Station as part of its cooperative observer network, providing data that helps forecasters understand Appalachian weather patterns. Official records show normal February conditions for all leap years, with temperature readings that match expected seasonal patterns. But in climate databases that store raw, unfiltered observations, digital records preserve the evidence of 12-hour springs that bloom in winter air, bringing warmth that shouldn't exist to mountaintops, where frost forms in defiance of thermometers that insist the world is warm enough for flowers that remain months away from blooming. The instruments continue their faithful recording, measuring temperatures that rise into impossible heat, while ice crystals grow in air that smells of dogwood blossoms and carries the songs of birds, celebrating a season that hasn't arrived yet and won't arrive for months to come. For 8 years, cargo ships delivered impossible items to a dock that was never constructed in Wilmington, North Carolina. The Port of Wilmington sits 18 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean along the Cape Fear River, serving as North Carolina's primary deep-water port facility. Established in colonial times, the port expanded significantly during the 20th century to accommodate container ships, bulk carriers, and military vessels. By 1980, the facility included 14 numbered docks extending into the Cape Fear River, with supporting infrastructure for cargo handling, storage, and inland transportation. The Port Authority maintained detailed records of all shipping activity, including vessel arrivals, cargo manifests, and dock assignments. Computerized tracking systems, implemented in the late 1970s, provided precise documentation of container movements from ship to storage areas to eventual pickup by trucking companies. The system was designed to eliminate cargo loss and ensure accurate billing for port services. Harbor charts published by the National Ocean Service showed the precise configuration of Wilmington's dock facilities, with each pier numbered and positioned according to detailed surveys conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers. City planning documents contained architectural drawings and construction records for every structure built within the port complex since its establishment. Yet shipping manifests from major cargo lines consistently referenced deliveries to Dock 47B, a facility that appeared on no official plans or harbor charts. The first documented reference to Dock 47B appeared in shipping records from Maersk Line on March 14, 1981. The manifest listed delivery of 43 containers to the non-existent dock, with cargo descriptions that Port Authority clerk Margaret Chen found unusual but not alarming. The items were listed as household goods and industrial equipment, destined for various consignees throughout North Carolina. Chen processed the paperwork according to standard procedures, assuming that Dock 47B represented a clerical error or temporary designation for one of the existing facilities. However, when she attempted to locate the containers for customs inspection, she found them stacked in a section of the port that shouldn't have had unloading capacity. The containers were positioned on what appeared to be an extension of Dock 14, but Chen's review of port maps showed no such extension existed. The area where the containers sat was supposed to be open water, according to recent harbor surveys. Chen contacted her supervisor, Robert Morrison, who confirmed that no construction had been authorized in that location. Morrison examined the container placement and found them arranged on concrete piers that extended approximately 200 feet into the Cape Fear River. The piers appeared to be newly constructed, with no weathering or age indicators, yet Morrison had no record of any construction contracts or permits for dock expansion in that area. The containers themselves presented another puzzle when opened for inspection. Customs Officer Patricia Williams found items that defied easy categorization. Kitchen utensils appeared normal at first glance, but felt wrong when handled spoons with bowls shaped for mouths that weren't quite human. knives with blade angles that seemed efficient for cutting something other than food. Williams documented furniture pieces that appeared functional but designed for people with different proportions than standard human anatomy. Chairs with seat depths that were too shallow and back supports positioned for spines that curved differently. Tables with leg spacing that suggested users who didn't walk with typical human gaits. Most disturbing were books written in clear English that contained words Williams couldn't find in any dictionary. The vocabulary appeared familiar but undefined, as if the texts were written in a dialect of English that had developed along different linguistic pathways. The content discussed ordinary topics, cooking, gardening, home maintenance, but used terminology that felt almost recognizable without being comprehensible. Dock worker Michael Park supervised the unloading operations for containers delivered to Dock 47B throughout 1981 and 1982. Park reported that the cargo handling equipment behaved strangely when processing these particular containers. Cranes would operate normally but require constant adjustment to maintain proper balance, as if the container's centers of gravity were located in unexpected positions. Park's crew noted that the containers felt heavier than their listed weights suggested, yet when placed on scales, they registered exactly the tonnages specified in shipping manifests. The workers developed an informal policy of double-checking safety procedures when handling Dock 47B cargo, though none could articulate specific reasons for their caution. The items unloaded from these containers were typically claimed within hours of arrival by truck drivers who presented proper documentation but seemed unfamiliar with standard port procedures. The drivers would arrive in unmarked vehicles, present bills of lading that checked out against port records, and transport the cargo to addresses throughout eastern North Carolina. Dr. Sarah Kellum, an anthropologist at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, learned about the unusual cargo through her husband, who worked as a customs inspector at the port. Kellum requested permission to examine some of the items before they were claimed and was granted access to several containers in January 1983. Kellum's analysis revealed objects that appeared to be everyday items modified for use by people with different physical characteristics or cultural practices. Tools showed wear patterns that suggested their users had different hand shapes or gripping preferences than typical human anatomy would require. Textiles were woven in patterns that seemed familiar but didn't match any known cultural traditions from regions listed in the shipping manifests. The books particularly intrigued Kellum, who found them written in grammatically correct English that used vocabulary she couldn't verify. Dictionary searches revealed no definitions for roughly 30% of the words used, yet the texts remained comprehensible through context. The content covered mundane subjects but described practices and procedures that didn't align with standard American cultural norms. Port Authority Director David Chen launched an investigation into Dock 47B operations in April 1983 after questions arose about billing and insurance coverage for the facility. Chen's review of construction records found no permits, contracts, or authorization for building the dock extension where containers were being unloaded. Chen contacted the Army Corps of Engineers to request updated harbor surveys and found that official charts continued to show open water where Dock 47B operated. Corps engineers agreed to conduct a physical inspection of the port facilities to resolve the discrepancy between charts and observed conditions. The Corps survey team arrived on May 16, 1983, and found no physical evidence of Dock 47B. Their inspection showed normal harbor configuration, with no dock extensions beyond the existing 14 numbered facilities. The area where port workers reported unloading containers showed only open water at the depth indicated by standard charts. However, shipping manifests continued to reference Dock 47B deliveries, and containers continued arriving with cargo that was successfully unloaded and claimed. Port Authority computers tracked the operations normally, billing shipping lines for dock usage and stevedoring services at the non-existent facility. The investigation was complicated by the discovery that Port Authority revenue records showed payments received for Dock 47B operations. The facility generated normal income through docking fees, cargo handling charges, and storage rentals. Accounting systems processed these transactions as routine business activities, with no flags or anomalies in the financial records. Federal maritime authorities became involved when the Coast Guard requested clarification about navigation hazards in Wilmington Harbor. Coast Guard charts showed discrepancies between reported dock facilities and official harbor configurations, creating potential safety issues for vessels entering the port. The Maritime Administration dispatched investigators who found the same pattern of contradictory evidence. Shipping records documented regular use of Dock 47B. Port workers described normal operations at the facility, and revenue was being generated from its operations. Yet no physical evidence of the dock could be verified through surveys or inspection. The investigation was classified in September 1983, when the Department of Homeland Security expressed interest in the security implications of undocumented port facilities. Port Authority personnel were instructed to avoid discussing Dock 47B operations with outside parties and to refer all inquiries to federal authorities. Shipping manifests continued referencing Dock 47B through 1989, when the last documented delivery was processed on December 15. The containers contained the same types of anomalous cargo that had characterized the mysterious deliveries throughout the decade. After that date, no further shipments were directed to the non-existent facility. Port Authority records were audited in 1990 as part of a modernization program, and all references to Dock 47B were quietly removed from computer systems. The revenue generated by the facility was reclassified as income from existing docks, and billing records were adjusted to reflect standard port operations. The Port of Wilmington continues normal operations with its 14 numbered dock facilities, handling container ships, bulk carriers, and military vessels according to established procedures. Harbor charts accurately reflect the physical configuration of port infrastructure, and shipping manifests reference only existing facilities. But in storage rooms beneath the Port Authority building, boxes contain customs documentation for items that were never quite right. Tools shaped for hands that didn't match human proportions, books written in words that don't exist, furniture designed for people who walked differently through spaces, arranged according to logic that felt familiar but wrong. The Cape Fear River flows past concrete docks that extend exactly as far as they were built to reach, carrying ships that deliver cargo to facilities that appear on charts drawn by engineers who measured every inch of water and shoreline. The port operates efficiently, processing containers filled with items that can be identified and cataloged and distributed to addresses where people live in houses furnished with objects designed for the way humans actually move through the world. But sometimes, late at night, when the river runs quiet between tides, dock workers pause and look toward the water, where Dock 47B unloaded cargo for 8 years, wondering what became of the people who ordered furniture built for bodies that weren't quite the same shape as theirs, who needed tools that fit hands with different configurations of fingers, who read books written in familiar words that meant things no one had ever bothered to define. In 1993, divers descended into Lake Norman and found a town that was supposed to have been erased 30 years earlier. Lake Norman covers 32,400 acres in north-central North Carolina, created by the construction of Cowan's Ford Dam on the Catawba River between 1959 and 1963. The artificial lake submerged portions of 4 counties and required the relocation of several small communities, including the town of Davidson, established in 1837 as a trading post and ferry crossing. The original Davidson sat in the Catawba River Valley at what would become the lake's deepest point. The community included approximately 200 homes, several churches, a school, and business district serving the surrounding farming area. When Duke Power Company announced plans for the dam project, residents were offered compensation and assistance with relocation to higher ground. Official records maintained by Duke Power and the North Carolina Department of Transportation document a comprehensive relocation effort completed between 1960 and 1962. Every structure in the flood zone was either demolished or physically moved to new locations outside the projected lake boundaries. Historical preservation groups worked with residents to relocate significant buildings, including the 1850s Davidson Methodist Church and several antebellum homes. The Army Corps of Engineers conducted final inspections of the flood zone in late 1962, confirming that all structures had been removed and the area was clear for flooding. Cowan's Ford Dam gates closed on November 1, 1963, and Lake Norman began filling immediately. Within 18 months, the original Davidson community lay beneath 110 feet of water. Dr. Patricia Williams, a marine biologist from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, was conducting fish population studies in Lake Norman during the summer of 1993 when her research vessel's sonar equipment detected unusual formations on the lake bottom. Williams had been mapping underwater topography to understand fish habitat distribution when the sonar returns showed geometric patterns too regular to be natural rock formations. Williams's initial sonar sweeps revealed what appeared to be a grid of rectangular structures covering several acres of lake bottom near the original Davidson location. The formations showed the characteristic angles and spacing of building foundations, streets, and property boundaries. The patterns matched historical maps of Davidson's layout with remarkable accuracy. Intrigued by the discovery, Williams contacted Dr. Robert Chen, an underwater archaeologist at East Carolina University, to request assistance with identifying the structures. Chen arrived at Lake Norman on August 15, 1993, with specialized sonar equipment designed for archaeological surveys. Chen's detailed mapping confirmed Williams' initial findings and revealed additional structures extending beyond the original sonar contact area. The underwater formations included not only building foundations, but also what appeared to be intact structures rising from the lake bottom. Some formations extended vertically for 20 to 30 feet, suggesting that complete buildings remained standing beneath the water. The discovery prompted Chen to organize a diving expedition to visually confirm the sonar findings. On September 7, 1993, a team of technical divers descended to the lake bottom at the coordinates where sonar had detected the most prominent structures. Dive team leader Michael Morrison reported finding a well-preserved street grid with concrete foundations marking individual building lots. The underwater landscape matched historical Davidson maps with precise accuracy, including the locations of the main commercial street, residential areas, and public buildings. Many foundations retained portions of their original structures, including walls, doorways, and interior partitions. Most remarkably, several buildings appeared to be completely intact. Morrison documented a two-story structure that retained its roof, windows, and exterior walls. The building's interior was accessible through doorways that had remained open during the flooding process. Debris and sediment covered the floors, but furniture and fixtures remained in place, preserved by the lake's cold, oxygen-poor water. The diving team found evidence of hasty evacuation rather than systematic demolition. Personal belongings remained in houses that should have been empty before flooding. Kitchen utensils sat on counters, clothing hung in closets, and family photographs remained on walls. The preserved interiors suggested that some residents had left their homes expecting to return, unaware that their community would soon be underwater. Dr. Sarah Kellum, a historian specializing in North Carolina communities, reviewed the diving reports and compared them with official relocation records. Kellum found significant discrepancies between what the divers observed and what government documents claimed had occurred during the relocation process. Official records indicated that Davidson's Methodist Church had been moved to higher ground in 1961, but diving teams found the church's original foundation with portions of the building still attached. The church bell tower remained standing underwater, rising 40 feet from the lake bottom. Inside the church, wooden pews were arranged as if for a service that never ended. Duke Power Company's relocation supervisor, David Park, had documented the removal of over 100 homes from the Davidson area. However, diving surveys found intact houses scattered throughout the submerged community. Many homes retained their original contents, including furniture, appliances, and personal items that should have been removed during the evacuation process. The discovery attracted attention from the North Carolina State Historic Preservation Office, which requested a comprehensive archaeological survey of the underwater site. State archaeologist Dr. Elizabeth Morrison organized an expanded diving operation to document the preserved community and determine how such extensive structures could have survived the supposedly thorough relocation effort. Morrison's team spent 3 weeks mapping the underwater town and found Davidson's business district largely intact. The general store retained shelves stocked with preserved merchandise. The post office contained mail sorted into boxes, bearing the names of residents who had supposedly moved away decades earlier. A small restaurant showed tables set for customers who never arrived for their meals. Documentation of the underwater discovery was complicated when Duke Power Company expressed concerns about liability issues related to the incomplete relocation. Company representatives argued that the structures represented debris left after proper demolition, not intact buildings that contradicted official records. The North Carolina Attorney General's office became involved when questions arose about potential fraud in the federal funding received for the relocation project. If buildings had not been removed as claimed, the difference between contracted work and actual completion could represent millions of dollars in misappropriated funds. However, the investigation was suspended when federal authorities classified the matter as relating to national security infrastructure. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which oversees dam operations, determined that public discussion of structural issues at Lake Norman could compromise dam security and regional power generation. Access to the underwater site was restricted, and diving operations were discontinued pending completion of a federal review. Dr. Morrison's archaeological team was instructed to turn over all documentation to federal authorities and avoid publishing their findings. The underwater Davidson site was designated as hazardous to navigation, effectively prohibiting further civilian diving. The official explanation provided to the press stated that the structures represented construction, debris, and natural rock formations that had been misidentified by inexperienced divers. Duke Power issued statements confirming that all Davidson buildings had been properly removed before flooding, and that any remaining foundations posed no threat to dam operation or public safety. Dr. Williams' fish population study was discontinued when her university funding was redirected to other projects. Dr. Chen transferred to a position with the National Park Service in Virginia. The diving team members signed confidentiality agreements as part of their compensation for the contracted archaeological work. Lake Norman continues to operate as a popular recreational lake and source of hydroelectric power for the Charlotte metropolitan area. Boating, fishing, and water sports attract thousands of visitors annually who enjoy the lake's clear water and scenic shoreline. No public access is permitted to the areas where underwater structures were reported. But in academic archives at UNC Charlotte, sealed research files contain sonar images of a town that was never properly erased, photographs of streets that still run beneath 110 feet of water, and diving logs that describe swimming through houses where families once lived, eating breakfast at tables that remained set for meals that ended when the water rose. The lake keeps its secrets well, but beneath its surface, Davidson continues to exist, as it was left a community preserved in time, waiting underwater, with its doors open and its clocks stopped, its residents long gone, but their belongings still arranged, as if they expected to return from some brief errand to find their town exactly as they left it, above the waterline, where towns are supposed to remain. In the depths of Lake Norman, street signs still mark intersections, where fish swim through what were once front yards, and church bells hang silent in towers that rise toward a surface that covers the sky, where birds once flew over a town that was supposed to disappear completely, but forgot to finish vanishing before the water came. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, hikers who walk together sometimes arrive alone. Great Smoky Mountains National Park straddles the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, encompassing over 520,000 acres of ancient Appalachian wilderness. The park receives more visitors annually than any other unit in the National Park Service, with millions of people hiking its 850 miles of maintained trails. The mountains themselves are among the oldest on Earth, worn smooth by millennia of weather and time. Cataract Falls sits 3.2 miles from the Sugar Lands Visitor Center along a well-maintained trail that follows an old logging road through second-growth forest. The waterfall drops 45 feet over moss-covered rocks into a pool surrounded by rhododendron thickets. The hike is rated as moderate difficulty, suitable for families and casual hikers who want to experience the park's natural beauty without technical climbing. The trail to Cataract Falls receives heavy use during peak season, with rangers estimating that over 300 people visit the waterfall on typical summer weekends. Trail markers are clearly posted every quarter mile, and the path is wide enough for hikers to pass safely in both directions. Emergency shelters and communication points are strategically located for visitor safety. Park Service records show that the trail has an excellent safety record, with fewer incidents per visitor than most other park destinations. The path is well documented in trail guides, and GPS coordinates for key points along the route are publicly available for hikers who use electronic navigation devices. Yet since 1971, groups hiking to Cataract Falls together have consistently arrived at the waterfall at different times, despite starting together and believing they had maintained contact throughout the journey. The first documented case occurred on July 18, 1971, when the Morrison family from Ohio reported a timing discrepancy during their visit to Cataract Falls. Parents Robert and Margaret Morrison had hiked with their 2 teenage children, maintaining conversation and visual contact throughout what they believed was a 3-hour round trip. When the family returned to their car, they discovered that Margaret and their daughter had been hiking for 4 hours and 30 minutes, while Robert and their son had completed the same hike in 2 hours and 15 minutes. All 4 family members insisted they had stayed together as a group, taking the same rest stops and following the same pace. Park Ranger Patricia Williams interviewed the Morrison family and found their account consistent but puzzling. Each family member could describe the same landmarks and trail features in identical detail. They had eaten lunch together at the waterfall and taken photographs that showed all 4 people present at the same locations. Yet their return times differed by over 2 hours. Similar reports began accumulating in Williams' incident files throughout the summer of 1971. Groups of hikers consistently reported arrival time discrepancies despite believing they had hiked together. The pattern occurred regardless of group size, hiking experience, or weather conditions. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychology professor from the University of Tennessee, learned about the timing anomalies from a park ranger friend and requested permission to study the phenomenon. Chen organized controlled observations during the summer of 1972, accompanying hiking groups to document their experiences firsthand. Chen's first expedition involved 6 volunteers who agreed to hike together while wearing synchronized watches and carrying GPS devices. The group started together at 9 a.m. and maintained close formation throughout the ascent to Cataract Falls. Chen conducted periodic head counts and confirmed that all 6 hikers remained present during rest stops and landmark observations. However, GPS tracking revealed that the group had somehow separated into 3 pairs during the hike, with each pair following different routes to reach the waterfall. The tracking data showed impossible paths through areas of dense forest where no trails existed. 2 hikers appeared to have traveled through a steep ravine that would require technical climbing equipment, while another pair seemed to have crossed a creek that had no bridges or ford points. Most disturbing, none of the hikers recalled any separation or route variation. Each person insisted they had followed the main trail in close contact with the entire group. When Chen showed them the GPS data, the hikers expressed confusion but maintained that their memory of the hike was accurate. Dr. Michael Park, a geologist from East Carolina University, joined Chen's research after learning about the spatial anomalies recorded by GPS devices. Park conducted topographical surveys of the Cataract Falls Trail area and found no geographical features that could explain the divergent paths shown in the tracking data. Park's analysis revealed that the GPS tracks led through areas of terrain that were impassable for hiking. Some recorded paths crossed vertical rock faces, while others passed through swampland that didn't exist, according to geological surveys. The tracking data suggested that hikers were somehow moving through three-dimensional space in ways that defied the actual topography. The phenomenon attracted attention from the National Park Service's Research Division when incident reports began affecting visitor satisfaction surveys. Families complained about timing discrepancies that caused confusion and concern, particularly when children appeared to arrive at destinations hours before their parents, despite hiking together. Park Superintendent David Morrison organized a formal investigation in 1973, bringing in specialized equipment to monitor hiking groups and document the anomalous timing pattern. The investigation team included park rangers, research scientists, and technicians experienced in wilderness monitoring systems. The team's most comprehensive study involved 24 volunteers, divided into 6 groups of 4 hikers each. Each participant wore multiple timing devices, GPS trackers, and radio transmitters to maintain constant communication. Rangers positioned at various points along the trail would verify group composition and timing. Despite the intensive monitoring, the same timing discrepancies occurred. Groups that started together and maintained radio contact throughout their hikes arrived at Cataract Falls at different times. Rangers posted along the trail reported seeing the same groups pass their stations at different times, sometimes with hours between sightings of people who believed they were hiking together. Radio communications added another layer of mystery to the phenomenon. Hikers carrying two-way radios would maintain conversation throughout their hikes, yet base station logs showed that transmissions from group members occurred at different times. Rangers would receive radio calls from hikers reporting their location, only to receive subsequent calls from other group members reporting the same location hours later. The investigation was complicated when the Federal Communications Commission became involved due to reports of timing anomalies in radio transmissions from the park. FCC engineers arrived to study potential electromagnetic interference that could affect GPS and communication equipment. FCC analysis found no evidence of interference or equipment malfunction. GPS devices functioned normally and provided accurate location data, but the recorded tracks showed movement through impossible terrain. Radio equipment operated correctly, but transmission logs indicated temporal discrepancies that couldn't be explained by technical factors. The study was quietly discontinued when the Department of Interior expressed concerns about publicity affecting park visitation. The National Park Service was instructed to classify the investigation as a routine safety assessment and avoid releasing findings that could generate negative media attention. Dr. Chen's research funding was redirected to other projects, and Dr. Park accepted a position with a private geological consulting firm. The monitoring equipment was removed, and rangers were instructed to treat timing discrepancies as normal variations in hiking pace rather than anomalous events. Official park documentation was revised to remove references to the timing anomalies. Trail guides and safety materials emphasized that hiking groups should maintain close contact and establish meeting points to avoid separation, without mentioning the specific phenomenon that prompted these recommendations. Great Smoky Mountains National Park continues to welcome millions of visitors annually who enjoy hiking its extensive trail system. The Cataract Falls Trail remains popular with families and casual hikers who appreciate its moderate difficulty and scenic destination. Park rangers maintain normal safety protocols and assist visitors with standard wilderness challenges. But in incident files stored at park headquarters, reports continue to accumulate from hiking groups who arrive at destinations at different times despite believing they walk together. Rangers quietly note the discrepancies in daily logs but offer no explanations to confused visitors who insist they never separated from their companions. The trail to Cataract Falls winds through forest that has watched humans pass for thousands of years, following paths worn by countless feet, seeking the beauty of falling water. Groups set out together in the morning, sharing conversation and pointing out wildflowers and bird calls, confident in their ability to reach their destination as a unit. Some arrive early, checking their watches and wondering where their companions have wandered off to, despite the certain knowledge that they never lost sight of each other among the trees. Others arrive late, surprised to find their hiking partners already waiting by the waterfall, insisting they had been together all along. The mountains keep their own time, measured in geological epochs rather than human minutes, and the trails remember routes that existed before maps were drawn, before GPS satellites traced lines across ancient ridges that have always known more than one way to reach the same destination, through forests that understand the difference between walking together and arriving together, in places where time moves like water over rocks, flowing around obstacles that exist only for people who believe they know which way leads home. For 6 years in downtown Statesville, North Carolina, the banking district operated on time that didn't belong to the rest of the world. Statesville sits in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, serving as the county seat of Iredell County since 1847. The town grew around the intersection of two major railroad lines, developing a compact downtown business district that housed the region's financial institutions. By the 1980s, downtown Statesville contained 7 banks within a 4-block area along Main Street and Center Street. The banking district operated with the precision typical of financial institutions. Each bank maintained synchronized clocks throughout their facilities, from lobby displays to computer terminals to security systems. Federal banking regulations required accurate timekeeping for transaction records, and banks invested in atomic clock synchronization systems to ensure compliance with interstate banking standards. Downtown Statesville's banks included First Citizens Bank, Wachovia, First Union, BB&T, Northwestern Bank, Statesville Savings and Loan, and Iredell County Bank. Despite their different corporate affiliations, the institutions shared similar operational schedules, opening at 9 a.m. and closing at 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. Their proximity allowed customers to conduct business at multiple banks during lunch breaks and facilitated the interbank transfers common in small-town banking. The banking district's isolation from other commercial areas created a unique environment during business hours. The 4-block area buzzed with activity between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., then fell quiet as employees and customers dispersed to other parts of town. This daily rhythm had characterized downtown Statesville since the establishment of its first bank in 1862. The first sign of temporal anomalies appeared on March 14, 1986, when First Citizens Bank manager Patricia Williams noticed discrepancies in her daily closing procedures. Williams had worked in banking for 15 years and prided herself on maintaining precise schedules for vault operations, cash counting, and security protocols. On that Tuesday, Williams began her closing routine at exactly 3 p.m., according to the bank's lobby clock. Her procedures typically required 45 minutes to complete, finishing by 3:45 p.m. However, when Williams completed her tasks and checked the time, the lobby clock showed 4:03 p.m., 18 minutes later than expected. Williams initially assumed she had made an error in timing or had been interrupted by unexpected tasks. However, reviewing the day's security footage revealed that she had followed her normal routine without delays or distractions. The footage showed Williams moving through her closing procedures at normal speed, but the timestamps indicated that tasks requiring 45 minutes had actually taken 1 hour and 3 minutes. More puzzling, Williams had no subjective sense of the extra time. She felt that her routine had proceeded normally and couldn't identify any period where she might have lost track of time or worked more slowly than usual. Similar timing discrepancies began occurring at other banks in the downtown district throughout the spring of 1986. Bank managers reported that their closing procedures consistently required 18 minutes longer than expected, despite following identical routines at normal speed. Dr. Michael Chen, a psychology professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, learned about the banking anomalies from his brother-in-law, who worked as a teller at Northwestern Bank. Chen was intrigued by reports of systematic time perception errors affecting multiple individuals in the same location and requested permission to study the phenomenon. Chen visited the banking district on April 22, 1986, carrying synchronized chronometers to monitor time passage independently of the bank's clock systems. Chen spent the day observing operations at First Citizens Bank, timing routine activities, and comparing his measurements with bank personnel's perceptions. Chen's chronometers confirmed the 18-minute time discrepancy. Activities that bank employees believed had taken normal durations actually required 18 additional minutes according to external time measurement. Most remarkably, Chen himself experienced the same time distortion tasks that felt like they required standard durations actually took 18 minutes longer than his chronometers indicated. Robert Morrison, security chief for the Downtown Banking Consortium, reviewed surveillance footage from all 7 banks and found identical timing anomalies occurring simultaneously across the entire district. Security cameras showed normal operational pace, but timestamps revealed that 8-hour business days consistently extended to 8 hours and 18 minutes. Morrison's analysis revealed that the time distortion affected only the period between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Banks that opened early for special appointments or stayed late for extended hours experienced normal time flow outside the standard business window. The 18-minute extension occurred only during regular banking hours and only within the 4-block downtown financial district. Dr. Sarah Park, a physicist from Appalachian State University, joined Chen's investigation after learning about the consistent time measurements across multiple locations. Park brought atomic clocks and precision timing equipment to measure any physical factors that might influence time, perception, or chronometer accuracy. Park's instruments confirmed that standard atomic time flowed normally throughout Statesville, including the banking district. However, mechanical clocks, quartz timepieces, and even digital devices operated by banking personnel gained exactly 18 minutes during business hours, then spontaneously corrected themselves overnight. The correction process occurred between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. each morning, when bank clocks would suddenly adjust backward by 18 minutes without human intervention. Security footage showed the time changes happening simultaneously across all banking facilities. Despite the institutions using different clock manufacturers and timing systems, bank customers began reporting unusual experiences during visits to downtown financial institutions. Eleanor Vasquez, a retired teacher who conducted banking business twice weekly, noticed that her appointments consistently ran longer than expected, despite normal service pace. Vasquez would enter a bank, planning to complete simple transactions in 15 minutes, only to discover that over 30 minutes had passed when she returned to her car. David Santos, a businessman who frequented multiple downtown banks during lunch breaks, found that his 1-hour lunch periods were insufficient to complete banking tasks that had previously taken 30 minutes. Santos began scheduling longer lunch breaks to accommodate what he assumed were increased wait times. Though bank personnel reported normal customer volume and service speed, the North Carolina Banking Commission opened an investigation in September 1986 after receiving inquiries about timing irregularities in Statesville Bank's daily operations. Commission auditors arrived to examine timekeeping procedures and ensure compliance with federal transaction timing requirements. The audit team found that all banks maintained accurate transaction timestamps and proper documentation, but confirmed the 18-minute daily time extension. Bank records showed that employees worked 8 hours and 18 minutes daily, while receiving pay for 8-hour shifts. The extra time appeared in attendance records, security logs, and operational reports. Yet bank managers had not noticed the discrepancy. Federal banking regulators became involved when questions arose about the accuracy of transaction timing in automated systems. The Federal Reserve required precise timestamps for interbank transfers, and the 18-minute discrepancy created potential compliance issues for electronic banking operations. However, examination of electronic transaction records revealed that the timing anomalies didn't affect computer systems that synchronized with external atomic clocks. Electronic banking operated on standard time, while human-observed activities extended by 18 minutes. The disconnect created a situation where people and computers experienced different durations for the same events. The investigation was classified when the Department of Treasury expressed concerns about public confidence in banking systems. Federal authorities determined that publicity about timing anomalies could undermine trust in financial institutions and create unnecessary panic about banking security. Bank managers received confidential instructions to avoid discussing the timing discrepancies with customers or media. The investigation files were sealed, and federal auditors implemented new timekeeping protocols that effectively concealed the 18-minute extensions from routine oversight. The phenomenon continued through 1992, when it suddenly stopped without explanation. On January 2, 1993, banks throughout downtown Statesville experienced normal time flow for the first time in nearly 7 years. Clocks maintained accurate time, and business hours returned to exactly 8 hours of duration. No official explanation was provided for either the anomaly's persistence or its termination. Bank personnel who had experienced the time extensions for years found themselves completing daily routines 18 minutes earlier than expected, creating initial confusion about scheduling and procedures. Downtown Statesville's banking district continues normal operations with standard timekeeping. Modern electronic systems maintain precise synchronization with atomic clocks, and business hours proceed according to posted schedules. The banking community has grown and modernized, with new institutions joining the established downtown financial corridor. But in storage rooms beneath several downtown banks, archived security footage preserves thousands of hours of impossible time recordings that show 8-hour workdays stretching to 8 hours and 18 minutes, while employees and customers moved through their routines, unaware that they were living through minutes that existed only in the narrow streets of a small North Carolina town where time forgot how to keep proper pace with the rest of the world. The clocks tick forward now with mechanical precision, marking minutes that belong to the same universe as the minutes everywhere else. But for 6 years, the banking district of Statesville operated in temporal isolation, gaining 18 minutes each day that had to be returned each night, borrowing time from somewhere else and paying it back while the town slept, while dreams moved at normal speed through hours that contained more minutes than they were supposed to hold.